It all started in a city that was close to the vampire village, Acro-E. A guy in a black hood was walking along one of the streets, past a bunch of homeless people. As he approached the tavern, he heard people talking about the horrible place where someone barely made it every day. The man said that no traveler comes in, no matter what you do. As he walked inside, pushing the two doors apart, the guy continued to listen to the conversation. The second man said that things were not only bad here, because bad rumors were spreading throughout the region. As it turned out, the rumors were about a vampire village that was just nearby. The bartender said that he would soon go bankrupt because of it. The guy who came in called out to the worker. The man in the cloak asked him to excuse him, and then began asking how he could get to the vampire village. The bartender became a little inspired, asked if the guy was a hunter, but the young man shook his head. Soon the young man, who turned out to be a necromancer, managed to reach the village of Jamond, which was considered to be occupied by vampires. Initially, all this was a special assignment. The guy was given it by a girl named Nina, who was a registrar. She said that the young man was asked to explore this dark place. The guy asked if being asked to investigate a place meant that these monsters actually lived there. The girl said that it wasn't. The village was abandoned, but the undead started using it as a base. She also added that some people believe that the village still exists and they are planning to attack people. For this reason, they must be prepared and ask to find the vampire that lives there. The guy said that he understood everything, after which the girl wanted to ask a few more questions. Nina asked the guy why his power changed from a tamer to a necromancer. For the guy, there was still a personal motivation. He believed that this place could give him the opportunity to find out the reason why he became a necromancer. This place could be the next step to solving the mystery. Lost in thought, remembering his conversation in the guild, the guy became also wary, and then two large creatures immediately appeared in front of him and began to howl at the moon. These were two animal spirits, the Minotaur spirit Ace and the one-horned wolf spirit Ray. The young necromancer immediately addressed them, calling upon his spirits, who continued to growl furiously. The boy raised his head and asked the two spirits if they felt anything. He emphasized that the spirits could sense other undead, but he found it difficult to understand them. It's worth clarifying that Randall still couldn't understand some of their roars because he used to be a trainer. Now his power had changed and he was following her clue. Several dead people with human bodies suddenly tumbled out of one building. Their gait showed that they were local undead. They immediately rushed at the guy. Randall let out a loud cry, cursed, and began to run away. His two spirits immediately rushed very aggressively to protect their master, who was in trouble. Ace and Ray were strong embodiments of the creatures, so it was not difficult for them to quickly deal with those dead people who rushed to attack. Minutes passed, and the danger was over. The bodies of the undead lay huddled together near the ruins. Randall stood there, trying to catch his breath. The boy was surprised to see such power. He came up and said that he felt uneasy about it, but then, crossing his arms, Randall said that he would pray for them. The boy thought that he could use the necromancy skill. He took out the book and started looking at the skills and saw that he had obtained the skills of bone smoothing, novice sword, novice mastery, and abnormal resistance. Randall said in shock that all he did was put his hands together. Thanks to the acquisition of the skills, reinforcement, and shape recovery, he was able to acquire this. Randall thought that if this was true, he should try it. The boy put his hand to the book and began to use an additional skill that he had when he was still a tamer. The youth used a large-scale contract spell in the hopes that he would be able to subdue and lure out those present in the ruins. A huge glowing field began to spread across the abandoned village. The boy watched carefully. Nothing happened. Then he began to study the book again. The boy was surprised that he received an extension of the range of necromancy. The book notified the boy that he managed to use the skill of a necromancer, so he gets several new spells. Among them were regeneration, physical resistance, blood recovery, flexibility, pain tolerance, and many more. The stats were improved by absorbing skills from the undead in his area. Randall was surprised that he could get such an incredible amount with simple actions. He was glad at that moment that he was able to get the skill table from the guild. Ray and Ace's status was also updated and improved. The guy had just acquired another skill from necromancy, Lich Extra White Flame. For now, all this was just a set of words on Randall. The young man thought that the last skills were related to real magic. The guy also remembered that White Flame and Illumination are used only by sages. He could not believe it, admiring the new power. The guy understood that there was a big difference between simplification and necromancy. With taming, the work with the creature continues and you work together even after such subjugation. However, necromantic steals abilities and the opponent disappears immediately. And if the guy wants this, he can only take the ability and the opponent will immediately disappear. Depending on how you think and approach all this, it might be possible to banish the vampires without resorting to the sacred magic that Randall had prepared before. Suddenly, someone appeared behind the necromancer. He heard footsteps and immediately turned around. A girl with blonde hair was walking towards him, who said that she had just been woken up. Not only did the guy disturb her sleep, but he also erased the girl's familiars. She asked if it was him, but Randall only got scared when he could see her wings. The girl began to laugh, saying that this answer suited her. The girl continued to laugh, and then began to slowly raise her hand. She pointed her finger at his hand and said that this would compensate for what he had done to her subjects. The vampire waved her finger upwards, and the hand she was pointing at immediately separated from the body, flying somewhere to the side. It was torn off in just a second, that Randall didn't even have time to feel it. The feeling of hellish pain still came when the guy had already fallen to the ground. Through the ringing in his ears, Randall heard the vampire laugh, but something helped the guy, the skill pain tolerance that he had recently received. Protecting his master, the one-horned wolf Ray ran out at the girl, growling menacingly. He jumped high, opening his toothy mouth. The blonde girl turned around, looking at the spirit boy. She smiled lightly and asked the wolf if this good boy really wanted to play with her. Randall screamed at his beast, telling it to stop and wait. The boy screamed that this girl was not someone the wolf could defeat. But the spirit was unstoppable. The girl rose into the air, then lightly touched the wolf's neck, moving to his back. Then she gave him a powerful push, pressing him into the ground and shouted for the dog to sit down. Following the first spirit, the second one rushed forward without lagging behind, the Minotaur Ace. He was much bigger and stronger, and the ground shook under his feet. The girl only sighed and said that she was popular today. The vampire waited until the bull approached her, and with a light movement of her hand, flicking the spirit with her fingers, she sent him back a few meters, thrusting him into the building. The guy looked at all this with horror. He quietly said that the girl was too strong and he would not be able to defeat her. When the vampire heard this, she immediately appeared behind him. The girl heard Randall praise her. The vampire smirked and said she was delighted, then hit the boy, sending him as far away as the Minotaur. Randall was lying on the ground, having knocked down an entire wall of the house behind him. The guy knew that he didn't feel pain, but he was losing a lot of blood. At this rate, it would kill him. The girl appeared next to him and began to speak. She looked into the boy's eyes and said that now the time for games was over. Her sinister laughter extended throughout the area, and sharp fangs could be seen sticking out from under her lips. Randall wasn't going to give up so easily. The guy decided to use one of the necromancer's spells that he had recently received. Stretching his hand forward, the guy shouted and summoned White Flame. The spell rushed forward, destroying everything in its path, also creating a flash of light. Soon he saw the silhouette of a girl with wings, who was walking towards him. The girl came closer and smiled, saying that apparently this was all Randall could do. The guy realized that the white flame had not worked, because there was not a scratch on the girl. Randall continued to hold on to where his right hand used to be. The guy smiled evilly and replied, telling the girl not to worry because she still had something for her. Randall raised his remaining arm high again, standing on a small platform, and shouted, summoning the next hacking spell. It was a lightning bolt, which had devastating force and was sure to work. The vampire looked up in surprise, where the strike was supposed to come from. It seemed that she would not have time to react and leave because the speed of the lightning was high. The spell hit the exact spot where the girl had stood a few seconds ago. The blast wave began to scatter all the dust of the previously collapsed houses to the sides, but Randall continued to stand on his feet. The wind flow from the explosion began to gradually increase, and the guy had to bend down to the ground so that he would not be carried away too far. Putting out his hand, Randall began to slow down his body. The moon was full. The clouds were starting to disperse in the sky. Randall was breathing very heavily, having spent a lot of energy. The guy raised his head up and stared ahead, trying to figure out how his attack went. Randall knew perfectly well that if this didn't work, then most likely the boy no longer had any chance against this creature. Soon he heard the footsteps of a shoe with a heel again. The guy leaned against the wall, sighing heavily again. It seemed like it was the end, but when the girl approached, she started talking. The vampire said that he had unique skills and interested her. Then something happened that Randall could not have expected at all. The girl smiled and, putting her hand to her chest, invited the guy to join her vampire family. Randall raised his head, his mouth and eyes wide open in surprise. The guy began to ask again, being overwhelmed with confusion and what kind of family it was. The girl smiled, raising her hand. She said that he understood everything correctly. She was a purebred vampire lord, so she could accept him into her family. Randall continued to sit, leaning against the wall. The guy was covering his wound, and the girl, after a pause, asked the guy what he thought about it. In her opinion, the opportunity was wonderful. Randall knew very well that he could hardly win here, so it was better to agree than to just die here. He shouted, suggesting that he needed to drink the girl's blood to join the family. The girl said that it was. Randall asked what would happen to him after that. The vampire raised her head, scratched her chin, and said that she needed to think about it since she thought that the guy knew himself. Randall stared at the vampire lord, confused, thinking that the situation was becoming absurd. The girl started screaming, saying that it was her first time, so he should forgive her. Randall looked a little confused, continuing to stare and wait for some kind of answer. The vampire turned to him, coughing slightly, and asked if he would act or not. Randall knew that even though the girl was a vampire lord, she was probably quite young by their standards. The guy slightly curled his lips into a smile and asked the girl's name. The girl smiled broadly, pleasantly surprised by such a question. She stood up proudly and said that her name was Mirin, and she was a pureblood vampire lord. Without jumping to a hasty decision, Randall turned to Mirin and said that he had a counterproposal for the girl. Mirin stared at him, then asked what the guy was talking about. To Randall, began to approach her. The girl said that she was in a good mood now, so she would listen to everything he told her. Suddenly, Randall began to feel some drastic changes in his body. The young man turned to the place where his hand had been. It began to be covered with something like dark soot and itched unpleasantly. The hand, which had been levitating in the air for some time being near Mirin, suddenly rushed to the place where it should be. Randall continued to watch all this in surprise. The boy slowly began to try to move his fingers and realized that his hand was fully functional as before. Mirin said that she had healed his hand using the skill, Lord of the Night. The boy knew he would get in trouble if she was the kind of vampire who enslaved humans. But she had healed his arm and he thought he could assume she wouldn't hurt him. The guy suddenly smiled and, squeezing his healed hand a little, made his proposal. Randall asked the girl if she would become his comrade. There was no meaning in the guy's words for the girl at that moment. Mirin crossed her arms and asked again about what it meant to be a comrade for a person. The girl folded her hands to herself and began to casually show her doubt. Randall thought that the girl did not want this, but she replied that the reason was completely different. Randall didn't understand what she was talking about at first and asked if he was the one she was afraid of. Mirin. The girl said that it was not quite so. Fear and panic were visible on her face, after which the vampire said that she was afraid of people. The girl began to explain that vampires were creatures that were completely incompatible with humans, and they understood this well. However, even those who did not interfere with the lives of humans were enslaved. Continuing to speak, she also added that among the vampires she had met, there were no victims, so she did not hold a grudge against them, but she knew how terrible humans could be. As the girl finished her story, they heard the noise of the debris mentioned under a small weight. It was Ray who ran to the owner. The girl said that she had nothing more to add. Mirin said that if it were a member of her family, then in that case she would be much calmer, because family is your subordinates, comrades, friends, and children. Randall interrupted the girl, saying that he is a necromancer, and that is why he can use his power to make immortal demons and the undead his friends. Then Randall stood up, brushing the dust off his coat. He looked into the girl's eyes and extended his hand, smiling and saying that he would become a member of her family. Then he added that the girl would have to sign a necromancer contract with him. They would become equal under such conditions, which was quite logical. Mirin smiled, chuckling slightly. Mirin, even more delighted, said that in that case she could do nothing if the guy was so persistent. She agreed and would become his comrade. As the girl was finishing speaking, the guy said that he was Randall. The girl didn't understand at first, but then she laughed widely and extended her hand, saying that the guy had a beautiful name. So, having all sat down in a small circle, which now consisted of two spirits, Randall himself and Mirin, the guy quietly said that they should think over a further plan of action. Suddenly, Randall had what he thought was a great idea. He turned to Mirin and said with a smile that if she didn't mind, she could become an adventurer like him. Mirin immediately perked up and a spark of interest was visible in her eyes. The girl, kneeling down and leaning towards the guy, said that it sounded really great. The girl also started to get curious, asking about what would happen when they signed the necromancer contract that Randall had mentioned. The guy said he had no idea. Mirren was indignant, asking if it was really his first time. Randall started laughing, quoting the girl. He also apologized and said that it was both his and her first time. Afterwards, the girl smiled and said that she had completely forgotten to clarify one detail. Mirren said that joining the family would have to be postponed for some time. When Randall asked why, Mirren explained that once he had made such a family contract, the boy could no longer break it, and violating it would result in death. So it would be better if they started simple. Randall looked away and said that he understood. The boy also thought that of course there was a risk of becoming dependent on these family ties, but he thought that everything would be fine if there was a contract drawn up on his side as well. But no, after that the boy decided that the most important thing for Randall would be to just be near this lonely vampire. He looked at the girl who was sweetly messing with his spirit. So it was like a new team of non-humans had appeared. Randall stood up and said that it was time for them to return to the guild and register the girl as an adventurer. But there was one detail that Randall simply had to tell. The guy said that there would be a lot of people in the guild, to which the girl only smiled and said that it would be good because Randall was with her. Randall smiled back immediately, happy with such an answer and confession. He understood that the girl trusted him. In that case, it was high time to go on their new adventure. And so, Randall and Mirren decided to work together. They headed towards the guild on foot under the cover of night. The boy covered himself with a hood, saying that the wind was getting stronger. Suddenly, the boy turned to the girl and said that it was already getting colder and visibility was very poor. He pointed to the building and said that they could rest in the tavern, to which Mirren agreed. The boys went inside and Randall went to talk to the owner of the house. Soon the man went up, taking the boys to a room where they could settle down. When they were alone, Randall smiled awkwardly and said that they only had one free room, so he should apologize. Mirren immediately said that there was no point in taking 2 rooms because there was enough space. The girl turned around and asked where Randall's creatures, Ray and Ace, had gone. The guy picked up a small bottle and said that the guy had taken one of them with him thanks to the skill Coffin of the Dead. The girl said she understood, and then added that they had not yet made a necromancer contract. Randall began to pack things and said that this was indeed the case. Mirren was very curious about this, so she said with a smile that they could do it right now. Randall was happy and almost immediately agreed with her. The guy rummaged through his things a bit and pulled out that very skill book to look at the instructions he would need to use to conclude a contract for his class. Having found the right page, the boy stood silently for a while, reading the contents, and then said that he was ready. The young man stretched out his hand and began to read the spell. As the necromancer spoke, a small magical vortex began to rise in the room, enveloping the bodies of Mirren and Randall himself. Randall finished speaking the words and closed his eyes. The room was silent, and soon the boy saw that the book reflected the conclusion of his contract with the vampire lord Mirren. The magical vortex disappeared, and Randall said decisively that the contract was ready. The girl looked at her body, not understanding what had happened. She said that she felt a strange sensation. "I looked at the book," Randall exclaimed, saying that it was really cool. Mirren leaned over and Randall began to explain that he had gained several additional skills through the fusion. Randall added that when they made a contract, their powers immediately combined. The characteristics were improved, and the status of Ray, Ace, and Mirren increased due to the strengthening of the familiar. Mirren was surprised that the guy could do such a thing. She folded her arms and said that she had never seen or heard of a necromancer before. Randall, when he saw it, he asked if it was true. The boy said that when he was a tamer, everything was different. Mirren saw him again, hearing that the boy was a tamer. Randall smiled and said that he forgot to tell her that. At that moment, Randall realized that it would be right and he would have to tell her everything, namely, the entire path from tamer to necromancer, which he was able to go through. The guy started the story by saying that it was a long time ago when he was the dead weight of his team. If you think about the efficiency of his current job, he has Ray and a roof over his head, which he is happy about. The guy involuntarily, and with a smile, began to remember those times when he did not even have a bed on which he could comfortably lie down. He had to make do with what he had. The guy from the small barn where he sat with his spirit looked out the window and saw his team. Even though it was a meeting for everyone, he was still not invited, which seemed sad to the guy. Suddenly, Randall heard a hysterical scream. Someone from the team was addressing Fado with particular fury, asking the guy how much longer he himself would tolerate Randall. The guy who was talking in a raised voice was named Loig Oeg. He was the main knight of the top-ranking team. The guy said that he didn't care at all that he was the leader's childhood friend. The guy also added that Randall was of no use to their group. Loig explained that the quests they were taking now were no longer toys. The Tamer continued to listen through the wall of the barn. The guy's beast, with whom he was then, suddenly began to get angry, seeing how his master was upset by these words. Feeling something was wrong, the wolf began to howl loudly. Randall immediately began to calm Ray down. This only detonated in the house, and Loig also added that the beast that travels with them is too loud and they can't sleep. The head priest of the top-ranking team is Quella. The girl, slightly worried, said that Randall was trying as hard as he could. They couldn't just throw him out. Team Mage General Male, holding a large sandwich in her hands, added that Randall was a good guy. After all, he wasn't completely useless, since the guy was cooking. Loig turned to the remaining member of the group and said that despite all the arguments the guys had made, something had to be done about it. Fado, who, as mentioned earlier, was the leader of the group, was sitting in the corner of the room on a stool. The guy exhaled heavily and said that there were things that only Randall could handle. Afterwards, the guy changed his position a little, folding his hands behind his head and said that there is always a risk, but nothing can be done about it. Fado added that everyone else could compensate for this with teamwork. Loiga just loudly and demonstratively hissed, showing his displeasure, and headed for the exit of the room where the meeting was taking place. The guy said that he went because he needed to get a good night's sleep. Randall looked up, away from Ray, and also heard everyone start to leave, arguing that they needed to go underground tomorrow. The guys were looking forward to tomorrow and hoping that everything would work out. After everyone began to gradually get up from their seats, completely unexpectedly for Randall, a loud blow was heard on the wall, which was clearly aimed at attracting the Tamer's attention. As soon as Randall turned around sharply and Ray became alert, jumping up from his place, Loig's scream was heard. The guy wanted to make sure that Randall could hear him now. The team's leading knight shouted that if that damn dog barked again, Randall would have to answer for it with his head in front of the entire team. Randall looked at his spirit again and started petting him, saying that Ray needed to hear this guy. The wolf started whining quietly, which made him sad. Randall had no idea when it all got that way. He felt awkward talking about it, but the guy thought he was doing his job perfectly. The guy started remembering and explaining that he was practically useless in battle, and for this reason, the guy's experience gain was much slower than the others. It was difficult to do anything with such a difference in skills. But then again, that was exactly how it seemed to him at the time. Looking at Ray, the guy smiled and said that, apparently, he was the only one who thought that about himself at the time. Despite the fact that Ray was a wolf that had previously been completely wild, the intelligence of this beast was very high, even its emotional component. The wolf understood everything perfectly and then began to support his master. Randall began to laugh, saying that he was ticklish, and then asked if Ray would help him. Randall began to pet the wolf, saying words of gratitude to him. All the time when his comrades treated the guy badly, only Ray helped him. Randall hugged his beast, pressing himself tightly to him. It was clear that Ray was also pleased with this, and it made him feel good. The guy said that Ray was his best friend. This achievement was very motivating for all the team members. Quella pressed her hands to her chest and asked God to bless them today. Male said that he didn't seem to exist. Randall walked behind everyone, carrying all the team's things that they might need inside the dungeon. The load was quite heavy, so he could not always keep up the pace. Loic turned to the Tamer and started yelling at Randall not to slow them down and to go faster. The guy also added that if he couldn't carry the luggage, then he was useless. Fado decided to rephrase the main knight's words a little and also ease the situation a little. The leader turned and addressed Randall, politely asking him to go faster. Today's outing was really important for all the team members, and many were worried about how it would go. Randall raised his head and said that he would try. Soon they approached the place where they were going. It was the dungeon of the Deicides, resembling a ruined and old cathedral, constructed of solid stone. Loig immediately sped up, switching to a run. The boy shouted for the others to keep up. Randall turned to his wolf and said that they would run too. Randall, however, kept thinking that this was probably his last outing with the team. He thought that at least for the last time, he wanted to be useful to them. Once inside, the team descended several floors and immediately encountered resistance in the form of monsters. They emerged from nowhere in large numbers. But everything happened according to the old scenario, as always. Loig, fighting off the monsters, did not forget to switch his attention to Randall, shouting at the guy to get out of the way. Quella turned her head to the knight and said sternly that now was not the time to sort things out. Male, however, covered her back, gritted her teeth, and said how hard it was now. Fado and Randall moved back a little, taking a short breather. Leisure turned his head and addressed the boy, saying that Randall should not engage in combat yet. Fado added that the guy's main task now would be to report on the situation around the team if reinforcements from other floors approached the monsters. Randall said that he understood everything. Loig was filled with rage amidst the excitement of the important quest and, it would seem, some personal dislike for Randall. The guy clenched his fist and said that Randall was completely useless. Fado pulled the knight of his team up, threw the sword over his shoulder. The leader told Loig to calm down because his words would definitely not make anyone feel better now. They all moved on, Ray helping to protect Randall from the monsters, while the boy himself shouted, warning Fado that 5 more creatures were coming at him from the left. At one point, they were surrounded on all sides. The group stood in a tight circle, each holding their own flank. Randall thought that if things continued like this, it would be hard for them. At one point, Ray, without a command from Randall, rushed at one of the monsters. Randall only managed to shout to the wolf, trying to stop him, and at that time, the others began to advance and enter the broken ring. Randall managed to alert his teammate that he was being attacked from behind. Loig managed to react and, with a powerful blow, took off the knight's head from behind. Loig shouted angrily, calling Randall a name. The boy began to accuse the Tamer of letting the monsters pass from his flank, and continued to curse, swinging his sword. Beginning to sense a strong sense of danger, Quella began to back away, clutching the sacred book she used to cast spells and buff the team. Suddenly, the girl screamed loudly, which made absolutely all the team members turn to her. Quella began to slowly tear her hand away from the wall. When the girl raised her hand and began to examine it, she could not understand what it was. Randall immediately shouted at the girl not to touch the walls because there was poison on them. Loig asked again, and then began to morally pressure Randall again, shouting that the guy, apparently, was mocking them. The knight began to accuse the guy of not being able to see the primitive trap. Randall was getting more and more angry about this. The guy frantically threw off his bag and began to search for the antidote in it, which he soon found. While the Tamer was rummaging through the bag, Male was already busy with the priest's hand. The girl turned around menacingly and barked that everything was fine and the guy could go on. Loig couldn't calm down and started his old ways, shouting about how useless Randall was. The team chaplain defended him, saying that the guy had tried, too. Randall just threw the bag over his shoulder and went on. Soon they made a halt and the Tamer quickly made lunch for the team from the almost ready products. After everyone had had a snack, they were ready to move on. Fado gave the command, telling everyone that they would be changing the general formation and duties of the team members. Looking at Male and Loig, Fado said that the guys would work in their usual pairing. Loig would act as before, while Male would prepare an attack. The guys immediately agreed. Afterwards, the leader turned to the priest girl, Quella, and told her that Fado himself would protect the girl, choosing the moment for a periodic attack. Quella would be in support now. Since everyone agreed and seemed to understand the leader, Fado shouted that they were moving forward in that case. Randall looked at the wolf and said that they were moving forward too. Having wandered into another corridor, they noticed that the ceilings were too high here. Soon they encountered the threat that was located here. Loig, in a slight panic, continued to look up and said that according to the rumors in the guild, the boss of this floor is a minotaur. Quell also looked up and said that this is the dungeon of the Godslayers. Randall himself was also scared and looked ahead. In front of them stood huge minotaurs, which were as many as 5. The beasts were almost 10 times larger than the heroes themselves. An urgent decision had to be made. Fado turned to the boys and shouted at them to run. Frankly, no one on the team expected such a decision. Loig asked again, saying that they couldn't run. It was useless since they had already met the floor boss. The priest said that they could save themselves if they ran from the 5th floor. The mage confirmed, saying that there was no point in fighting 5 bosses. Everyone started running. Randall was less mobile as he was holding a large bag on his back. Randall also started running, but was noticeably starting to lag behind. He turned to Fado and said that he had luggage. The leader shouted that the guy was responsible for him, so he had to do his job and not whine. Quell turned around and started yelling again, saying that this was not the time to be worrying about that, and that it was the wrong time to be arguing. Male added that they should run away. Remembering this, Randall exhaled, saying that this was how their teamwork was always built. Even the guy and Ray were in danger then. Randall understood that it was impossible to run while carrying 5 people's things. Loig turned to the mage Male and shouted, addressing Male. The knight said that the girl always called herself a genius, but now she can't think of anything. There was one obvious solution that no one had put forward out loud yet. If someone sacrificed themselves, the rest would be able to survive and get out of the labyrinth. The boys continued to run away, and soon, Fado noticed how Luigi was looking sideways at Randall. The guy suddenly said that it was a great idea. Then Luigi grinned and loudly announced that they had an excellent candidate for the role of the victim. The guy continued to run at the same level as Randall, looking into his eyes. Randall stared at him in surprise, shouting at him if Luigi was serious right now. Quella said that was too much, but Luigi immediately said that in that case she could go instead of him. Luigi turned to Quella with a menacing grin and began to call her over, asking if the girl would sacrifice herself. It was obvious that her body was shaking with fear. Quella was very scared that she might die. It was normal because the survival instinct kicked in. The girl looked sadly at Randall and sped up. Randall looked back at the girl with alarm and understood everything without any words. Her eyes already showed the decision that the team's head priest had made. As soon as Quella began to increase her speed, everyone else seemed to get the signal and began to speed up as well. Ray and Randall, who were carrying heavy bags of things, began to noticeably lag behind. The force's Randall was starting to run out of time, and all he could see was his team abandoning the guy, which only made him even more frustrated. The guy kept running, starting to curse under his breath. The guy looked at them and understood perfectly well that these people really were using him as bait to escape. If Randall didn't come up with something now, he was finished. Suddenly, someone started approaching Randall. The guy saw his old childhood friend and the team leader, Fado. Randall looked at the guy in surprise. It was really him, and at that moment, there was no limit to his joy. Deep down, Randall knew that the team couldn't do that to him. At that moment, the Tamer thought that he was saved. The covered face then began to smile, and Randall wanted to ask Fado to help him with his things. Fado interrupted the guy at that moment, sternly calling his name. Fado continued to run next to him, but there was no sign of any attempt to help. The leader continued to speak, admitting that after clearing this dungeon, he wanted to throw the guy out of the team. Randall turned to his friend, his eyes slightly dimmed. He thought so, because why talk to him about this now? The leader said that there was also one detail. Fado said that Randall could still change his mind by doing something today. Randall turned around in surprise, asking the group leader what he was talking about. After this question, Fado turned to the guy and his face became fully visible. The team leader smiled widely and he exuded malice and bad intentions. Frightened, Randall immediately shouted the wolf's name, calling him to help. Fado grabbed his sword, which he had not drawn from its sheath, and shouted that it was useless. Ray turned and was ready to defend his master, but the large bag on his back also hindered the beast's agility. Fado began swinging at Randall, who tried to jump away. The team leader had put a lot of effort into trying to knock Randall down so he could be left here in this dungeon, ultimately turning the guy into bait for the boss. It was very hard to expect this from Fado, because the guy had never shown himself like this before. In the end, the guy said that he did all this for the common good. Fado landed his sneaky, non-lethal blow on Randall, buying his team time while the Minotaurs were busy with the guy. The Tamer began to fall to his knees. The leader smiled again and told Randall not to hold a grudge. Everything was indeed done for the common good, but not for the benefit of one of the team members. The Minotaurs were gradually catching up with the boys, moving not so fast because of their size. Fado added that if the boy died here, he would be remembered. Randall raised his eyes angrily, looking at the laughing Fado. The leader added that Randall would die like a legend, so he could not worry and just sacrifice himself. Those were the last words Fado said to him that day. The boy immediately grabbed his sword, looked at the Minotaurs once more, and ran away, leaving Randall alone. Randall continued to sit with the heavy bag on his shoulders, cursing and saying that Fado hadn't held back at all this time. The Minotaurs were getting closer and closer to them. At one point, Randall realized he was ready to accept that he was going to die. The guy looked ahead and thought that nothing had anything left. Various events and faces began to appear before his eyes. Inadvertently, the boy began to remember Fado, who had betrayed him in the end, as well as Loic, who had hated him from the very beginning. Two girls from the team of Male and Quell, the first of whom will remember only the food that the guy cooked for them, as well as the priest who took care of him, but that was earlier. None of them were looking at the guy now, just like they hadn't looked at him then. All the hard work the guy had tried to bring to the team had just gone down the drain. The Minotaur was already a step away from the guy, and he could understand this by looking at the shadow that completely covered him. Randall thought that he was tired of all this and now he could rest. As the Minotaur swung his enormous club, a sudden howl and the sounds of a fight were heard. Randall turned to see Ray trying to protect him. Randall was afraid for his pet and began to shout his name, wanting the wolf to stop fighting and run away from here. But the beast continued to fight, although it was not stronger than its opponent. The Minotaur grabbed the wolf with his hand, who tried to sink his teeth into his neck and immediately threw him into the wall, where a dull bang was immediately heard, followed by the beast's whining. The wolf, although he was thrown back, did not give in. This beast could use in battle not only its teeth and sharp claws on its paws, but also the horn on its forehead. But the Minotaurs continued to outnumber the wolf. One of the bosses swung his club and struck the spot on the ground where Ray was standing. It hit the wolf right on the ground, causing Randall to scream. Randall continued to watch as Ray displayed incredible bravery and loyalty, but the Minotaur kept removing the wolf and throwing it aside, adding blows from his club. Randall screamed at his wolf, begging him to stop attacking. Randall's face, filled with despair, screamed that the wolf needed to escape and live. The boy had already started to cry, sitting on his knees. No one had ever cared for him the way the tamed beast did. Randall had always considered him his best friend. But Randall still didn't understand why the wolf wouldn't leave him. The tamer shouted at the wolf as loud as he could. The boy birthed so that Ray wouldn't sacrifice himself for someone like Randall. The Minotaur, who continued to wave the wolf away, seemed tired of playing and firmly fixed the animal in his hand. Ray continued to try to break free. The Minotaur took the weapon that could decide the outcome of this fight, and it was the sharpest axe of the Minotaur. Holding the wolf with one hand, the boss swung and hit Ray on the head. It was hard to watch without tears, so Randall completely stopped holding back his emotions. The guy knew that he had experienced much more pain when he saw Ray die first. Memories rolled through his head again, only they were no longer about these traitors, but about his friend Ray. The guy remembered how Ray supported him and was always there for him. Randall also replayed over and over the memories that had happened on their last night. That was when the tamer had said that there could be no better comrade than Ray. Ahead, a few meters away, in front of the guy lay the body of a wolf, bleeding. It was no longer moving at all, and the bag that was tied to its belly remained on it. Tears streamed down Randall's face as he continued to scream his wolf's name, already rising to his feet and rushing towards his body. The Minotaurs stood behind Randall, not at all exhausted, watching as the boy sat down across from the wolf they had just killed. The hallway continued to echo with, "Oh no, Ray, Ray, Ray." To Randall at that moment was that they would soon meet their friend. An axe also appeared above the tamer's head, aiming towards him. As soon as the blade was already a few centimeters away and Randall himself pressed himself into the ground, Ray appeared in front of him again, standing between the guy and the weapon. The blow landed on the bull's horn. The boss who was delivering the blow clearly did not expect such a turn of events, so he was immediately caught off guard. Ray jumped up and sank his teeth into the Minotaur's neck. This time, the Minotaur couldn't fend off the wolf's attack, and Ray wasn't going to give them another chance to survive. The wolf tore out a chunk of flesh, severing an artery, and blood gushed out. Randall couldn't believe what he was seeing. He anxiously asked Ray if it was him, and then looked down. The body of a dead wolf lay before him. After a short time, the bodies of the boss of the 5th floor of the Godslayer dungeon were lying around Randall. Ray was standing nearby, but paradoxically, the body of the wolf was also lying nearby. Randall looked around and did not understand the essence of what had happened. The guy began to try to say something when he immediately experienced a severe headache. Randall realized that he had fulfilled certain conditions for necromancy. He had absorbed the ability of the wolf and 5 minotaurs, and with the release of energy, Ray was available for use. Randall turned to the wolf, who was standing very close, and began to call him by his pet's name in a hesitant voice. The wolf responded immediately, smiling at the boy tamer. Randall was glad that the wolf was alive and nearby. The guy began to reach out to him with his hand, but immediately realized that he could not touch the wolf, or rather his form. Randall immediately realized that his pet looked slightly transparent and was also hovering above the ground. The wolf looked at the guy questioningly, seeing his reaction to the beast. Randall looked down and realized that Ray had died because of him. The wolf had protected the boy to the last. Suddenly, the wolf began jumping on the spot, surprising Randall, who did not understand the reason. The guy found out the reason for the wolf's joy. Ray became stronger. Randall thought that it was because of the received ability of the necromancer, and now the guy understood Ray's feelings better. The wolf felt neither shock nor anger over his death, but only pride for protecting his master until the very end and the ability to serve even after death. Moreover, the beast became much stronger and will now always be with Randall. All this only caused a new torrent of tears from Randall himself. The guy understood that even taking into account the fact that the wolf's death was due to the inexperience of the owner, Ray was still glad that he stayed nearby. The wolf continued to portray a smile on his happy face and hover in the air. Randall knelt down and bowed to the beast as a sign of respect, thanking him. Now the question was completely different. What should Randall do with these dead minotaurs? The guy examined their bodies and then put his bag on the floor. Randall thought for a moment, gently scratching his chin. He remembered that when he unlocked the necromancer skills, the voice told him that the boy had absorbed the power of the minotaurs. Looking again at the bodies of the slain bosses, Randall wondered if he could have gained their power through necromancy or some special new skills. Randall began to gradually approach the corpses, taking one step at a time. Suddenly, the guy had an idea that he could try to summon them if he was a necromancer. After Randall had thought about it, the body of one of the bosses began to move again, and soon jumped up sharply, appearing in front of the guy at full height. Randall was very scared. Randall initially thought it was very scary. He turned to the Minotaur standing in front of him and thought that the same thing had happened to him as Ray. But if that's the case, then that spirit must now be under the control of Randall himself. The guy looked at his hands, and some kind of aura began to hover around him. Looking closely at the hand that Randall then clenched tightly into a fist, the guy finally understood what kind of absorption ability he had actually received and what its strength was. Afterwards, Randall carefully approached one of the walls and decided to try something. The guy swung his leg and hit the wall of the dungeon with all his might, breaking a stone slab. The aftermath of his blow was more visible than ever before. The entire wall was covered in cracks, and the guy only said that it was unexpected for him. Afterwards he looked, thinking that there were as many as 5 minotaurs here. Therefore, this ability is called absorption, but it does not seem that Ray lost his power. It would be correct to call it all separation. Afterwards, the guy examined the bodies that were left. He understood that minotaurs were quite expensive, but Ray's body also couldn't be left in the dungeon like that. The guy thought about how he could take the minotaurs from here, because they were just huge. Suddenly he heard that the conditions for learning the skill, I Slay the Dead, were also met. Randall wondered what this unknown ability was. According to its name, it could help transport bodies. After that, the necromancer began to try to use it. Pointing his hand towards Ray, the boy shouted, "Coffin of the Dead." Unexpectedly for Randall, the body began to glow and then slowly lifted off the ground. Soon the wolf turned into a small vessel. Staring at his hand, the boy wondered if he could use this as storage for items. He could put things in there, but could he take them out? Opening the bottle back up and casting a spell, the guy released Ray's body again. Randall smiled and thought that this was a pretty useful thing and that he could take the minotaurs out of here with it. Afterwards, Randall realized that it probably wouldn't work for his luggage. Suddenly, he heard that voice again, which informed the guy that the minotaur was available for use. The boy turned around and saw the body of the minotaur behind him. Or rather, it was a spirit. Randall thought he had gathered everyone, but the minotaur reached for the luggage. Randall was surprised by this, asking the bull if he really wanted to carry it. He grunted and then lifted the bag off the ground, for which he was thanked. This was all becoming more interesting to the boy. Still smiling broadly, Randall told the Minotaur that he should give it a name. The Minotaur lifted the heavy bag, after which Randall was able to come up with a name and offered it to the spirit. The youth said that he had named the bull Ace, to which there was a positive reaction. Randall smiled, happy to have his new companion. The guy asked to take care of him, Ace, to which the beast began to moo loudly and contentedly again. After the boy gave the Minotaur a name, he heard that Ace's status had been raised by improving his familiar, meaning that by getting a name, he had become stronger. Ray wasn't bad either, as he had defeated 5 Minotaurs. Afterwards, Ray looked up and smiled again, realizing that like his spirits, the guy had also risen from an ordinary baggage porter to a necromancer with powerful abilities today. The guy walked through the dungeon and thought about what awaited him next. He was very interested to know if there were other necromancers. In any case, Randall would not be in his old team. They had a variety of activities to choose from. They could go and find comrades, become heroes, go back to clearing dungeons. Basically, they were completely free now. Meanwhile, the squad that Randall had previously been a part of was making its way up. They were having a hard time doing it, and Loig was still angry, saying that they had already been here, but there were an incredible number of monsters. Fado began to try to take matters into his own hands. He shouted to the 2 girls, commanding that Loig and he would take the vanguard, with the mage and priest covering their backs. Quayla asked to wait for the leader, saying that it would be better for him to stand behind and help fight back there. Fado objected, saying that there were strong enemies ahead, to which the girl replied that they would not be able to cover them with their backs open. At some point, the girl's face changed dramatically, and she, looking down, sadly said that everything would be different if Randall were with them now. Male shouted at Loigu, saying that the guy was just wasting his strength. The knight immediately snapped back, shouting for the team's mage to fight back silently. He shouted that he couldn't do anything because there were too many monsters. Male responded menacingly that even Randall was better, which hurt the knight even more. Loig began to curse Male, saying that none of this would have happened if Randall, about whom Loig also spoke vilely, had not died with their luggage. Fado noticed every detail that was happening. He saw that the team was teeming with discord, swearing, and aggression. They were all embittered, and he began to reproach himself for the wrong decision he had made earlier. Fado froze, completely abstracted from the battle. The guy stared into space and continued to listen to Loig's cries that his sword was already dull and could not cut with it. Fado consoled himself that all this was not his fault. The guy's hands began to shake, after which he rushed into the crowd of remaining monsters with a furious cry and began to cut them down, showing the team all his inner emotions. Male felt uneasy when she saw that their previously calm leader of the group was now furious. Loig shouted at them to leave him and not interfere now. Quella also looked at Fado while answering Loig, who asked the girl not to waste mana. If they could reach the third floor, the resistance of the monsters there would be much less. At some point, Fado stopped. All that could be heard was the leader of the group trying to catch his breath, greedily gulping air into his chest. Suddenly, he quietly said Randall's name. Fado's head was now filled with memories from his childhood, when the boy was always in first place. He was praised in their village and considered a source of pride, and Fado was always in the shadow of his friend. In order to try to somehow approach the strength of his comrade, Fado spent long and sleepless nights in his home library, studying thousands of books and notes. But time passed, and the changes were minimal. In all, they continued to talk only about Randall, who was considered a genius on a completely different level, because he constantly took first places in exams. One day, Fado couldn't help but turn to his friend, slightly bowing his head before him. That's when the guy said that he wanted to be like Randall. Fado asked to share his power. Fado learned a lot from him, everything he could, and continued to try hard. The guy knew that he would never reach Randall and eventually just became jealous of him. After they formed a team, the guy made his friend carry things and made sure that others did not notice his talent, which always overshadowed Fado. All this made the leader lose his temper. Fado was furious when the team started talking about Randall again. Suddenly, the guy shouted, asking why he was in Fado's way again. Having let out this cry, the boy turned sharply towards the monster that was approaching from behind. Fado turned sharply, swung his sword, and cut off its heads. Fado was the next candidate for the title of hero, and he continued to be torn apart by emotions for his former friend. The leader continued to swing his sword, shouting his name. After they had gone a little further, Randall saw several chests with rewards. The guy bent down, began to study all this, and thought that these were excellent things. The Minotaur began pointing to one of the black cloaks that lay among the loot. Randall realized that Ace had asked him to put it on, and the boy immediately equipped himself. Yomi's cloak. This thing immediately raised the status, thanks to the ability to absorb. The Necromancer's abilities evolved, and the abilities of Ray and Ace increased, and the guy could now regulate their visibility. The last point where the guy can adjust visibility interested him. He decided to try and use the skill on the spirits. Ray and Ace immediately noticed each other. Seeing the friendly reaction of his companions, Randall was happy and realized that, as he thought earlier, only the guy could see. Then he thought that people might be afraid of Ace, so he would make only Ray visible. Now all that was left was to sort out the things that were left here as a reward for completing the Godslayer dungeon. There were a lot of things, but Ace could help with the delivery. Randall noticed that the reward included a lot of cool stuff that his old team could have gotten. The stuff was much better quality than their current gear. Ray and Ace noticed that the memories of the team once again reflected sadness on the boys' emotions. Randall, he immediately calmed them down, telling them not to worry, because it didn't bother him anymore. Randall was determined that as soon as he returned to the guild, where he definitely needed to go, he would immediately leave the team. The guy also understood that they themselves wanted to throw him out. Randall smiled sheepishly, thinking that he would be interested to see the reaction of his old crew when they saw him alive. It would be especially cool to see his former friend, Fado. When the guild door swung open, Randall and Ray walked in together. all attention was immediately focused on the guy who had already become the stuff of rumors and legends as if he had died. Even Randall couldn't expect such attention from the outside. However, everyone quickly found out about him and noticed his absence among those who returned, because the guy had long been considered useless. Suddenly, Randall heard a girl scream, who couldn't believe her eyes. It was Nina, who was incredibly happy to see the guy and his wolf Ray. The girl also said that the guy had changed somehow. Nina immediately apologized for her outburst, and then added that the guy's aura had somehow unexpectedly changed and was something unusual. Then she said that it wasn't particularly important and invited the guy to sit down so that he could tell her everything. Meanwhile, someone called out to Randall from behind. His entire team was sitting there, drinking. They were very relieved to see their porter alive. Randall turned calmly, recognizing the voice. He called out to Fado, showing no emotion at all to his former friend. Fado, however, was pale and asked how the boy had managed to survive. Randall answered him, saying that he had defeated all 5 Minotaurs, from which they had escaped. Fado waved his hand, saying that this could not be because the enemies were 100 times stronger. Afterwards, Randall shouted that Ray, who had rushed to protect him, had also died in this dungeon. This was something Randall could no longer say calmly, raising his voice for the first time. Loig just chuckled, still sitting at the table. The guy had clenched his fist since the very beginning, as soon as Randall appeared here. The knight nodded at the spirit, saying that according to Randall, this mongrel was just an illusion. Randall didn't fall for another stupid provocation from the narrow-minded Loig, simply turning away. The guy added that he was going to tell the guild about what happened. And there was something else that Randall also had to say right away. The necromancer said he was quitting the team, implying that he was getting kicked out anyway, so he thought it was okay. Loig didn't think it would be a good thing for their team to be stained by a teammate's betrayal. He stood up and grabbed Randall's arm, telling him to stop. Loig, in his usual angrily and obscene manner, addressed Randall, calling him names and adding that the guy apparently imagined himself to be someone else if he dared to speak in such a tone. Randall stood there, unmoving. Loig told him to stop putting on airs, the brat. Loig added that the guy was just dead weight, dragging them down. Loig tried to bend the guy's arm, but Randall only slightly added effort and did not even flinch, which Loig immediately thought. The knight did not understand how some porter had gained such strength. Randall had acquired the skill, superhuman strength, which he received after absorbing the power of the Minotaur. Now this skill has progressed to ultra-superhuman strength. Randall thought that his additional skill was really incredible, as he had expected. Loig was no longer a hindrance to him. Randall could push him away whenever he wanted. To everyone's surprise, Randall did so, telling himself that the boy was no longer the weakling he once was. Loig began to fall backwards, cursing at Randall. But Loig wasn't going to let it go like that. He swung his arm and hit Randall in the face, giving it his all. He also told Randall not to get too carried away, calling him names again. Randall began to fall backwards towards one of the tables. Fado immediately shouted for the knight to stop immediately and stop causing a massacre in the guild building. In addition, Loig clenched his fist, and standing over the necromancer said that if this pathetic baggage porter had properly protected the luggage and carried out his duties, then they would not have screwed up. Randall began to rise carefully to his feet, asking if he had really just said the word screwed up. Male, sitting at the table, casually added that Loig had failed to stay in the vanguard and that was why Quella had been wounded. Loig began to scream shrilly, ordering the mage to be silent. Randall began to look for Quella with his eyes, asking the girl about the wound. She only smiled timidly and said that everything was fine, showing her bandaged hand. Randall noticed that the girl's thing was also damaged and he didn't want her to end up in a dungeon with just one wound. The guy snapped his fingers and said that he had a robe she could change into. Everyone looked at Randall in surprise. Fado slowly began to ask about what was just now. Meanwhile, Quella shouted that this robe was not equal to, but even superior to, her current one. Fado was outraged that Quella's robe was one of the sacred artifacts of the church, and if the one that Randall gave her was of superior quality, then it was completely unclear where the guy got such items from. Male, who had been trying to emphasize her genius before, immediately entered into the dialogue and confidently said that this thing was a reward from the boss of the 5th floor. Randall calmly told her that if she needed anything else, she could come to him with such questions. Fado and Loig stared at the guy at first, but then a smile flashed across the knight's face. Loig turned to Randall, saying that the boy could still be useful sometimes. Summing up, the knight said that if there were more things here, then the trip was not just a waste of time. After these words, Loig extended his hand forward and with an evil grin told Randall to give him all his things that he currently had with him. Randall was extremely surprised by this. Loig continued, saying that the boy had heard him perfectly well. It was Randall's fault that they had returned barely alive. Then he said that now Randall would finally be of some use, which they had been waiting for. Loig shouted that the boy should not be left with a crumb, and Fado immediately intervened. It was a rather tense and anxious moment in the guild. Everyone was watching what would happen next. Nina was also standing behind the necromancer and watching what was happening. Randall had no intention of obeying Loig, and after looking around, the knight realized that it would make him look weak. He shouted that the boy had forced him and grabbed Randall by the cloak. After he did this, something suddenly grabbed the guy and started to open from the ground. Many were surprised by this, thinking that Randall had telekinesis. To show how serious he was, Randall snapped his fingers and a huge minotaur was revealed in the guild, holding Loig in his hand. Everyone gasped in horror. Randall calmly said that the minotaur he was able to kill in the dungeon of the Godslayers, after death, became one of the guy's companions. Surprised, Fado started waving his arms, saying that Randall was just a tamer. He didn't understand where the guy could have gotten a dead familiar from. Randall just reminded him that he had already said about Ray's death. Randall said he would split the loot between the group. Loig started yelling that the guy was probably making fun of them because it all belonged to them. After that, Ace let go of Loig, who fell to the floor with a thud. Randall said that he had found 5 treasure chests. He took only the cloak for himself, and the rest should be divided among the group. Nina immediately asked Randall if he was sure, but his decision remained the same. The guy looked at the members of the former team and said that this would be his parting gift. Nina was a little upset by this decision, because from what she saw here, the girl realized that these people were not worthy of receiving the coins from the dungeon. Nina said that if the guy was sure, they would leave it to the guild. Then she asked if the guy wanted to give them anything else, and Randall immediately remembered the minotaurs. Randall said that it should be divided equally between everyone. Nina replied that Randall had every right to the bodies of the bosses, because in the end, they were defeated when the guy was already fighting alone and was not a member of the team. The girl also added that it was impossible to say that there was no evidence of any harm being done to them by the team at all. All the members of the group were surprised by such a statement. The girl added that the guild recommends that you first take everything useful yourself, while the others will then bargain with the guild for the transferred items. Randall was surprised to hear about the trade, but Loig and Fado were even more stunned, as they understood what all this would ultimately mean for them. The girl said that given the price of everything she saw, Nina could roughly calculate the approximate amount of resources mined. After that, the team members will be able to buy whatever they want from the guild. Loig was about to rush forward, accusing Nina of talking complete nonsense. Fado immediately blocked his way with his hand, telling Loig to stop behaving like that. Fado responded, made the decision for the whole team. The guy said that he understood everything. Loig immediately began to be indignant, saying that it would be better to get it firsthand. Fado made it pretty clear that if they were going to buy everything from Randall, they would have to pay immediately. Since the group was preparing for a new dungeon, they had spent all their money and were broke. Nina bowed carefully, quietly thanking Fado for understanding her. Then she turned to Randall and motioned for him to come to their reception desk. Nina needed clarification and asked Randall if she understood everything correctly. The girl said that they leave all the things at the guild, and later they will discuss the exact price. Randall agreed, saying he would leave it to her. Nina smiled and said they could discuss leaving the team and checking in alone in another room for now. Loig asked Randall to wait a moment, then grabbed him again. The knight accused the boy of abandoning them, leaving them like this, with nothing. He again blamed Randall for their failure. Loig said that initially Randall didn't even put a drop of effort to reach the 5th floor. At this time, Ray began to growl angrily at Loig, instilling fear. Loig turned around and looked at the spirit of the one-horned wolf. He didn't even understand what it was. The beast had a completely different aura and seemed much stronger than before. Everyone around started talking about Ray, saying that he was incredibly strong. People also said that Loig got what he deserved and was so scared that he couldn't even move. The atmosphere continued to escalate, and Loig began to realize his worthlessness in this situation. He could do nothing to Randall. After that, the knight turned around, cursed at everything, and walked away. After Loig left, Fado also called out to Randall. The boy turned around, and the leader said that their knight had said too much, but there was some truth in those words. Fado said that Randall had become terribly strong, but he hadn't told his team, so it had happened. It was obvious to him, but Randall interrupted his former friend. Randall addressed Fado by name and looked at him sternly. The necromancer asked if he could even hear what Fado was saying. Randall, with a little hurt and sarcasm, repeated Fado's words. He didn't tell us anything. Randall said that perhaps it would be more accurate to say that Fado didn't give him a chance to say it. And only now did Fado decide to publicly admit that he was the only one to blame for this. Nina stopped the guys, saying that they needed to listen to Randall's story from the very beginning to understand who was to blame. Fado shouted angrily, pointing out that they themselves could still speak up. Nina cut him off, saying that they had already said enough before Randall arrived. Nina looked at the guys and said that they made it look like Randall wanted to sacrifice himself. Their group, in turn, tried to stop him, but the guy did not listen. Then Nina said that they gave Randall various tasks, but he constantly abandoned them, and so, in the end, Randall died in the dungeon. Nina glanced at the leader and asked if she was telling the truth. Fado wanted to say something, but Nina immediately continued, making her voice louder. The girl said that now, if their testimony was false, the guild would blacklist them as adventurers who gave false reports. Afterwards, Nina stated that they should know the following: defaming a guild is a crime. All of their S ranks will be revoked and there will be several other sanctions depending on the situation. Nina firmly said that a reward would be placed on their heads, and posters with their faces would be hung all over the city. The guild would compare Randall's testimony with the group's, and then hold a trial and examine the results from all sides. In the end, Nina added that if there are any objections now, she will listen, but if the guys are satisfied with everything, she will hope for further cooperation. Fado couldn't say anything. He just stood there silently, looking at Nina. The guild worker saw that there were no objections, then turned to Randall and said that they had to go. Nina and Randall began to walk away to the other end of the room. Quella looked at Fado and saw that tears were rolling down his face, because they were facing inevitable defeat. The girl, unexpectedly for everyone, also shouted, asking to wait for Nina and Randall. The guys began to turn around, not understanding what else the guys wanted to add after their leader. The girl clenched her hand into a fist and asked to be taken along. This was indeed very unexpected. There was an awkward pause in the room. Mail added that there was absolutely no need for them to stay with Loig. The knight had been causing a lot of trouble with his knightly order since the beginning of his career as an adventurer, and moreover the guild would not ignore the recent statement. The mage said she didn't care about S ranks. She doubted they would be able to continue adventuring in the future. Between Fado or Randall, the choice was quite obvious. Fado got really angry, starting to look sideways at his two teammates, who were also apparently already ex-teammates. He wondered what these girls were doing. Randall thought that it was Mail who had suggested using the guy as bait. She definitely knew the guy would die. Loig certainly won't get out of this story unscathed, since he said and did a lot, showing himself in all his glory in front of the entire hall. Fado will also get it. He is the leader after all. As a result, Randall understood perfectly well that this was the only chance for salvation for the girl. As soon as the heat was on, they were ready to betray their comrades without delay. Randall turned around and said that they were only saying that for their own benefit. The necromancer had no desire to join forces with them, and there was no way he would fight alongside them. Quella asked Randall hesitantly about his decision, realizing that the boy was refusing. Randall said that he would not even listen to anything she put forward in her defense. The girl immediately pursed her lower lip, realizing that they had really done too much bad to Randall. Nina called out to the guy and said that they could go. The guild worker and Randall followed up to the hotel room. The Tamer's former group remained standing below, watching the load carrier, who had suddenly become stronger than all of them. At the top, the girl took out a small bag of coins that Randall had been given for the items and the minotaurs. She also took out a book and said that the guy had become a necromancer and that this item would help him greatly. After Randall told her everything, Nina looked at him and added that it was a very reckless move on the part of his former team. Randall scratched his head, then smiled widely. He said that Nina was right, and the guy also shared that he still does not understand his becoming a necromancer after death, because he even became stronger. Nina said that she meant the time when the guy was still a tamer. Even from the guild's point of view, it was clear that the guy was the backbone of the team. Randall told Nina not to joke like that. The guy considered himself a completely useless tamer, so he carried all sorts of junk. He thought that the girl really overestimated him. Nina said that she really wasn't exaggerating. The girl added that only an experienced tamer could eliminate all the team's shortcomings by carrying the load. Nina added that without Randall, Team Fado would never have been able to obtain their coveted S ranks. Randall looked at her sheepishly, asking if that was really true. Nina also said that back when Fado personally wanted to exclude Randall from the team, she was going to talk to the Tamer. But then Loig intervened in the conversation, so she could not find the right moment, which she now deeply regrets. Nina did not even suspect that everything would turn out like this. Afterwards, Nina wanted to clarify something else. The girl asked about Quella and Mail, because they could join Randall under his leadership, to which the guy categorically denied. Nina gradually started to get up from her seat, saying that it would be a pity for the guild to lose such a high-ranking team. She also added that although they were far from the royal capital, they were on the front lines. And since the Margrave needs protection, they would be glad to see high-ranking adventurers in this matter. The girl offered to help in finding a group for Randall, but the boy interrupted her, apologizing. Randall put his hand on his chest and smiled, saying that from today on he decided that he would travel on his own. Now the boy could proudly declare that he was a free man. Nina at first looked at the guy in surprise, but then smiled relaxedly and said that she understood everything. Then the girl awkwardly added that the guild must have an S-rank team. Afterwards, Nina awkwardly said that if she really wanted to provide Randall with someone, would he mind? Randall smiled and said that if the girl insisted, he would think about it. The guild worker was very pleased with this statement. She smiled widely and began to return to work, promising that she would find the best of the best. Randall's story ended, which he had been telling Mirren all this time. The guy said that he was alone until he met a girl, and here they were. Mirren looked at the boy, saying that it must have been hard for him, since he did everything on his own. Randall smiled, saying that it was the exact opposite, since he now felt complete freedom. Then Randall quietly added that he would never have met Mirren if he hadn't gotten such a free one. Mirren immediately started laughing loudly. The girl jumped up and said that she didn't even doubt it. Of course, Randall would be glad to meet such a comrade as she. Randall responded with gratitude. Mirren expected to receive much more compliments, but this did not spoil her mood. The girl said that it was time for them to sleep because they had a lot of work tomorrow. Meanwhile, the entire Fado team was sitting in their room clutching their heads. Quell said that it shouldn't have ended like this. Loig was cursing Randall. Mail covered her face and sitting on the bed said that she knew who was to blame for everything. Loig clenched his fists and jumped up, aggressively asking why Mail was showing off. The girl continued to sit and shed tears, saying that it was too late to change anything. They had already done everything, and now the blacklist was crying for them. Most likely, it was all over for them, which everyone understood. They continued to look at each other cautiously, trying not to catch each other's gaze. Meanwhile, Fado stood by the window and wondered how long Randall would continue to bother him. The leader did not understand how much longer he would have to remain in the shadows. When the next day came, Randall and his new companion Mirren went into the forest to bury the bodies of those animals that had now become the boy's guardian spirits. Minnie immediately warned everyone that if she did this procedure, the spirits would never be able to return to their bodies. She asked if they were sure, to which they immediately approved. The girl nodded, then said that she understood the spirits perfectly. Snapping her fingers, the ground around began to be covered with a black aura, which gradually rose upward. Everyone stood and watched what was happening. Soon the bodies that were lying on the ground began to sink into the earth, as if it had become liquid, like water. After a couple more minutes, they were no longer visible on the surface. After that, there was a bright flash, reminiscent of an explosion. Randall covered himself with his hand, and then saw two horns, one of which belonged to Ray and the other to Ace. The girl smiled, continuing to control the process with her hand. She, being pleased, said that it turned out even better than she could have expected. The two material objects that connected the spirits to this world rose into the air and moved towards the spirits. Ace and Ray looked on in surprise to see what would happen next. The horn of the Minotaur and the one-horned wolf began to merge with the spirits, penetrating their immaterial bodies. After this happened, a bright flash of light occurred again. Randall's head announced that his status would be greatly increased due to evolution. All companions became much stronger, and Ace moved to another level of evolution. Randall said it was amazing. Mirren added that their bodies were in good condition so they could use them, but for their master, they sacrificed them to become stronger by turning into spirits. Ray also became a Fenrir, raising his rank. The beasts began to cuddle up to their master, showing their emotions. Mirren smiled and said that they really loved him. Mirren added that it was rather strange. Randall did not understand her, after which the girl explained that she could partly understand why they liked the necromancer. Randall scratched his head and said that he had, frankly, gained some skills when he made a contract with Mirren yesterday. The guy wanted to understand how to use them. The girl looked at him in surprise, after which Randall named the very skills he had spoken of, Lord of the Night and Black Fog. Mirin. She screamed in fright that she couldn't believe it. Mirin shouted furiously, saying that these were unique skills. The girl also asked that she was afraid that she could no longer use them due to the absorption of the necromancer. Mirin immediately cast Black Mist, and when she returned to her form, she began to examine her hand. She sighed, saying that the skills were still under her control. Mirin said that Randall could copy the skills of other creatures. Then she began to explain that her skills were twilight magic. It was a real rarity among the attributes of darkness. The girl also added that only those who control death itself can receive them. Mirin thought it was not very fair to teach him this, but she was ready for the sake of her friend. Randall, while the girl was talking about all this, stood and silently looked at the girl. The silence slightly affected her and she rushed at the guy, thinking that something was wrong. Holding her head, Mirin exhaled and said that it would be better to start with Black Mist. The girl explained that, as the name suggests, this ability allows you to turn into mist. Physical attacks do not work on high-level vampires, but there are situations where they are attacked using materials that are weaknesses of vampires. As long as Black Mist is activated, the attack will not reach you. It is no exaggeration to say that this is the best ability for defense. However, since the skill consumes a lot of mana, it is difficult to use this power. The girl also added that the second skill, Lord of the Night, uses the user's magical power as a basis to be able to create familiars. When Randall asked the question, Mirin quickly explained that it was about a familiar that would be generated, that is, a soul of twilight magic. Randall could say that it was the essence of the girl, but from a human point of view, it was a miracle. Since these creatures possess twilight power, they also possessed the same abilities. That was how Mirin had managed to heal the boy's hand that time. Randall now clearly understood how Mirin had managed to pull off such a trick. Randall suddenly decided to ask another question. The guy said that he didn't understand the point regarding the twilight magic that Mirin constantly talked about. She just laughed and said that Randall should know that. Many said that if she drank blood, it would increase her lifespan. So, in other words, the undead for the guy is the same as blood for her. That's twilight magic. The girl sat down and said that the energy associated with death is special. What is important is how it is used and controlled. Then she added that they are similar in this. Randall looked at the girl and said that they really did have a lot in common, but as she said later, there really wasn't much point in talking about it. Mirin said that she could show the boy something else. The girl started talking about the skill that Randall used on his familiar last night, Dead Spirit Coffin. They stopped and Mirin said she had something similar, but much more advanced. The vampire straightened her hand and shared the skill, Thunder at Nightfall. The guy read the skill name in surprise. The girl nodded immediately and said that the Dead Spirit Coffin only allows you to store the bodies of the dead, and her skill allows you to store anything. Randall was glad, because this was what he needed in the dungeon of the Godslayers. The guy decided to test the skill by stretching out his hand and reading the spell. This ability worked almost the same as the skill the necromancer already had. He pointed his hand at the bags, after which they began to turn into a small bottle. Everyone stared in surprise at the missing items, which had now become a very compact glass bottle. Randall realized that he no longer had to worry about transporting luggage, but then he noticed how sad Ace had become. Randall looked up and smiled, telling the Minotaur not to worry. The boy added that he valued Ace not because he carried things. The necromancer was sure that soon there would be a task that only Ace could do. 8. That was why, when the day came, Randall wanted Ace to help him. The boy said that he would count on the spirit. Ace raised his hands high and began to hum happily. After they had done all their business in the forest, Randall said that it was time for them to continue their journey. Mirin agreed, and then Randall immediately remembered something. Randall said that from the rumors he'd heard, vampires had many weaknesses, but Mirin thrived in the sun. Mirin leaned towards the guy and immediately made it quite clear to him that he should stop underestimating her. Randall was slightly frightened by such a mood of the girl. Mirin said that she is the Lord of Vampires, the Great Lord of Darkness. Sunlight, holy water, silver, and crosses do not affect her, so do not equate her with the common rabble. Randall thought for a moment, then decided to ask, saying that the girl, in that case, should have a natural defense against such attacks. Mirin said that it was not so. The girl explained that her unique skills allowed her to avoid such danger. If she did not use them, she would immediately be turned into dust. The necromancer thought about it. Then it all came out that Mirin couldn't be killed, unless, of course, she wanted it herself. The girl laughed, saying that it was so. She also added that no one could compete with her. Randall had a question prepared and asked the girl what would happen if she was hypnotized. Mirin smiled again and said that there was still such a possibility. Mirin felt awkward about such conversations and said that she could also bypass hypnosis in some cases. Afterwards, she said that this conversation would continue when it would be necessary again, but not now. After the girl started flying away from Randall, the guy thought about it. The girl said with a smirk that she was looking forward to it, calling the guy an adventurer. Randall wanted to test something and grew wings like a vampire lord. Mirin immediately started screaming that it was unfair to do that. She began to slowly try to say something, but a joyful Randall interrupted her, asking what had happened. He began to rise up, exulting and saying that he could now fly. On the way to the guild, Randall started stretching and talking about how tired he was. The guy added that they could fly here on the Black Wings. Mirin added that there was nothing they could do about it. The guy would die if he ran out of mana halfway. Randall even thought that they could buy a carriage, but the girl said that it would be better to master the skill and travel would be faster. Randall thought about the skills, but Mirin immediately hurried him. The necromancer stopped her for a second and asked if she was sure that everything was fine. The guy added that this guild was on a mission to exterminate vampires. Mirin immediately asked if the guild was still doing this. Randall said that there had been no vampires or government orders lately, so the missions had stopped. The girl smiled, slightly adjusting her hair. She said that in that case, everything was fine, and then asked Randall if they could defeat her. Randall smiled, feeling the girl's authority and confidence, after which he immediately replied that he doubted their strength, which was clearly not enough. The guild door swung open and everyone immediately recognized Randall, who was walking in the company of a cute girl. The adventurers also noticed that his wolf had grown a couple of times in size. The conversations at the tables continued. Many thought that it was because of his companion that the guy rejected the offer of Meili and Quella. There were also rumors that the group dumped Randall, and he then rejected them. Randall had indeed become very popular in the guild, retaining his S rank unlike his other former colleagues. Mirin smiled and said that the guy was truly a star. The guy turned around, smiled at his companion, and said that in his opinion, she now stood out much more, in a good sense of these words. Mirin didn't understand him right away, so she asked what she had done wrong. The girl noted that she had been specifically studying people, in response to which Randall laughed and said that everything was fine. Nina, noticing the couple, immediately greeted the guys from behind her counter. The guild worker noticed the girl next to him and asked the name of this beauty. Mirin's spirits and confidence, to which she immediately straightened up and told Nina that the girl had good taste in people. After that, Mirin leaned over to Nina and gently touched her chin. The vampire lifted her up and looked at her neck, adding that Nina was so beautiful that she even made you want to eat her. Randall immediately intervened, blocking Mirin with his hand. The guy immediately apologized to Nina for her strange behavior. He introduced the girl, saying her name, and then said that she was his new friend. Nina laughed, saying it was nice to meet her. Randall thought it would be a shame if Mirin got caught, so he had to be careful. She read his mind and said he was right. Nina asked Mirin if she could take a registration test to determine her skill. Randall supported the girl, saying that it would be very cool. Nina took her tablet and said that they would test Mirin and Randall. The necromancer was surprised when he heard his name. Nina added that she would like to reconsider his rank, if the guy does not mind. They came out to a small training field, where there was a small table where the guild judge usually sat, and a small dummy in the middle. The guys were already ready for the tests. Nina apologized, running up to the boys. The girl said that Randall's partner was late, so they could check Mirin first. Mirin said she had no objections and was ready to begin. While learning what to do, Mirin listened carefully to Nina, who pointed out a target in the distance. Mirin confirmed, saying that she understood everything. Afterwards, Nina added that as soon as the girl was ready, her task would be to attack this very ball in any convenient way. Mirin smiled again and said that she understood everything. Nina went to prepare something when the vampire said that she intuitively felt that she should not destroy this strange target. Randall chuckled and said that for once, Mirin was surprisingly right. Mirin brushed off the joke, asking how long she could hold back. When Randall asked if the girl had any weapons, she pulled out a pair of daggers and said that these weapons were passed down in her family. Randall said that in that case, everything would be fine and she would definitely cope. The guy also added that if the target did break, then the gun would have to be blamed. Mirin agreed, saying that the guy had a good idea. Nina called the vampire, saying that they had finished the preparations. The guild was ready for the girl to begin the test. Nina sat down at her desk and prepared the adventurer's forms. Mirin stood opposite, about 20 meters from the ball, and tightened her grip on the pair of family blades. Nina saw the girl's weapon and thought that the girl was not using any magic or ranged attack at all. However, the blades looked quite dangerous. Nina also thought that this was probably the princess of some country, to whom Randall had been assigned to take care of her. Mirin got ready and shouted that she was starting. Having covered the distance to the target in a matter of seconds, Mirin rushed past, striking with both blades at the target, which was shattered into pieces. The remains of the target began to fall to the ground, and Randall, seeing the result, tensed up and began to come up with various excuses in his head. Nina was also very surprised by this outcome. The crowd began to chant applause, calling out to each other. Many began to envy Randall, talking about where the guy found this beauty, who, in addition to everything else, was also terribly strong. Randall, wasting no time, immediately jumped up to Nina, hearing one of the versions that people shouted. The guy said that the target was most likely too old. Nina said that it seemed so, and then thought that B rank would suit both of them perfectly. Mirin, worried, asked if he was too high, to which Randall replied that it was fine. Suddenly, someone came up to the boys from behind and expressed their reaction with a long, "wow." The stranger added that even if the target was old, the girl simply tore it to pieces. The girl added with a wicked smile that Mirin fought as if she wasn't human at all. Randall looked at the girl who had just arrived in shock, as if he knew her. Nina immediately jumped up, shouting the name of the guest. It was Luminese. The guild worker said that the girl was late. Mirin at this time did not understand at all what was happening. Mirin asked if Randall knew her. The guy answered that he did, because this girl has a skill that appears once in a century, the Holy Sword. The girl is also the youngest solo adventurer to not be S-ranked. By the way, Lumine's Rithest, the Sacred Sword, was a diva legend of this world. Lumine smiled, slightly embarrassed. The girl threw the sword aside and said that she really was the legend that there were many rumors about. After that, the girl stuck her sword into the ground and stretched her muscles a little. Having warmed up, she smiled widely again and suggested that they start the duel, citing the fact that she and Randall were both busy people. Randall continued to watch the girl prepare and said that he was not particularly sure about his own busyness, but it was clear that Luminese was indeed the type who had a lot to do. The girl took a deep breath, then raised her sword and took a few confident steps forward. Randall immediately felt something begin to concentrate around him. The guy covered himself a little with his hand, thinking about what kind of powerful aura this girl had. She was much younger, but already had such a strong pressure. The girl took the sword with both hands and held it out in front of her. She really seemed like a very scary person, and it was red in just one look. Luminese loudly asked if Randall was ready, and then immediately began to advance forward. Randall immediately saw this and knew that it was time for him to act as well. The necromancer put his hand forward and shouted the name of his spirits. Ray and Ace immediately appeared on either side of the boy and gave their menacing battle cries. Luminese looked at all this with interest. The girl immediately understood what the necromancer's power was, but she already had a plan on how she would deal with him. The girl smirked, then called out to the spirits that she was there. Suddenly, her next action was a jump, after which Randall and his spirits lost sight of the girl. A few seconds later, Luminese appeared above the voices of the necromancer and his pets, swiftly heading towards Fenrir with her sword. Minotaur Ace managed to notice this, and immediately began to swing his new weapon, which he began to wield after the last evolution to a unique class. After attacking the one-horned wolf, the girl noticed the bull's weapon heading her way. Luminese was an experienced warrior, so she was able to easily avoid the blow. The Minotaur began to swing again, to which the girl only smiled and said out loud that Ace was also very slow. The bull attacked the target, but the sacred sword slipped to the side again. By slightly changing their tactics, Randall's spirits gradually began to adapt to combat with a more elusive opponent than all the previous ones. But the sacred sword did not lag behind, also adapting to the attacks of her opponent, managing to parry everything skillfully. The girl understood that she needed to get to the necromancer himself. Most often, Ace and Ray managed to attack in turns, so that the Minotaur would not suddenly hit the second spirit. This hindered them a little because Luminese could always dodge the blow. However, the girl was only enjoying it. She said that both spirits surpassed A rank in terms of strength. Luminese also said that the Minotaur didn't look like some old monster. After the Minotaur hit the ground, Ray rushed to attack again, mainly trying to strike the first blow with his horn. The girl managed to reflect everything, also praising Fenrir. A slight lull in the arena. Both spirits looked at their opponent, who was catching her breath at that moment. It was clear that Luminese was also giving it her all. Randall, who had been standing aside, thought that his spirits had indeed become much stronger. The boy raised his hand and shouted at them to continue at the same pace. Suddenly, which was a little unexpected for Randall, the girl turned to him and asked if the necromancer was sure that he could be so carefree during the certification. The girl threw the blade at him, raising it. The sacred sword said that the guy was acting like a coward, forcing his familiars to fight while he himself watched from the sidelines. Randall realized he had let his guard down, but he quickly came to his senses. The boy extended his hand and shouted the spell, Black Mist. Luminese continued to rush towards him, telling the boy not to forget whose test this was. As soon as the sacred sword had already reached its target and lowered its blade, Randall seemed to evaporate from under it, leaving only part of his body to the side and a black aura. Luminese was simply shocked by what the guy was now able to use in practice. She looked at him in surprise, as Randall at that time almost restored his material form, thinking that he barely had time. The distance between them stretched a little again, and the girl calmly said that the guy had several interesting abilities. Then she added something else. At the same moment, Luminese appeared behind the necromancer, saying that he still couldn't keep up with her. Nina and Miran. They shouted the guy's name in fear from a distance. It felt like Luminese was so excited that the exam fight had long since become real for her. She raised her sword and screamed that it was the end. As the sword swung towards Randall, who fell to one knee, many who were watching the fight simply closed their eyes, not wishing to see the young man die. But after a few seconds, they saw that the necromancer was still alive. The guy covered himself with his hand, holding back the massive blade of the sacred sword. Luminese was shocked by this. Cold sweat slowly began to run down the girl's face. She saw that Randall had just sacrificed his arm and would most likely continue to fight. The girl raised her sword and then went the other way. Luminese smiled and said that Randall wasn't as bad as she had thought at first glance. Randall smiled back. Clutching the wound on his arm, the boy told her that if he wanted to pass, he should at least show that much determination. Luminese liked this answer and said that the boy passed. Afterwards, the girl solemnly declared that she, the sacred sword of this country, Luminese, confirmed that Randall was worthy of possessing the S rank, which is given to adventurers. A pleasant shock engulfed the entire audience that watched the exam. Many were happy for Randall, shouting that the guy was amazing and had talent, having achieved S rank while being a loner. Randall smiled, scratching the back of his head. He walked up to Luminese and thanked her, after which he said that the guy didn't think he had won. The girl chuckled, saying that it was true and he still needed 100 years of training to defeat her. But then she added that the sacred sword had a premonition that such a thing might happen soon. Randall was suddenly surprised as he absorbed new skills, super reaction, and super sensitive. The necromancer immediately realized that he had acquired good abilities. Suddenly, somewhere behind Randall, someone started calling him. It was Nina, who was running to meet him. As soon as the guild worker approached, she immediately congratulated the guy, saying that he was incredible. The girl said that not only his familiars had become stronger, but Randall himself had also gained strength. The guy continued to be embarrassed, saying that he had not gained much. Randall also thought that in the end, it was all because of the skill that Miran gave him. But Nina, blushing a little, continued to stand her ground, saying that he really did become stronger. Luminese suddenly intervened in their conversation, asking if she had finished her work here. Nina smiled and thanked the girl, saying that that was indeed all for today. Luminese extended her hand to the boy and smiled, saying that it had been a great battle. The girl said that she would be happy to do it again sometime. Randall was pleased that such a strong adventurer could acknowledge him. The guy extended his hand in return and said that he didn't mind if they met again sometime. This was the beginning of a new friendship between two adventurers of the highest rank. They would have been a good group if not for their personal views on the world. Randall cheerfully said that for him, this fight was a great opportunity to gain useful experience. Lumina said that it was the same. The girl also urged the necromancer not to forget the sensations he experienced. Afterwards, the girl literally jumped out of their handshake, climbing onto the fence of the examination field. The girl said that she would go have fun with the dragons and would also pray for the boy's success. Randall looked into Luminese's eyes with a warm and sincere smile and said that it was completely mutual. After that, the girl made a quick dash and went on her way. Miran immediately ran to Randall, for whom she was so worried. The girl said that the young man's hand was in terrible condition and something had to be done urgently. Even though Randall said he was fine because the wound was shallow, Mirren ordered him not to move. She held out her hand and shouted, "Night Lord." The girl continued to direct her hands, healing Randall. The guy was shocked that the girl publicly used her skills, after which she grew vampire wings. Mirren looked behind her and saw that she had wings. Nina nervously shouted for them to quickly follow her. The girl grabbed both of them by the collar and dragged them into the guild. Once they had found a safe place, Nina began yelling at Randall, accusing him of not telling Nina anything about Mirren. Randall began to apologize, after which he said that Mirren was indeed a vampire who had a rather interesting past. For this reason, the girl was a little afraid of people. Mirren knew she had made a mistake and was ashamed of it. Randall continued to reassure Nina, saying that he just didn't want to make a big deal out of a molehill. Nina began to try to somehow smoothly explain the whole situation, expressing her understanding, but Mirren, who was standing opposite, abruptly declared that she would leave this place. Randall spread his hands, turning to Mirren. The guy did not understand what the girl was talking about now, but the vampire told the necromancer not to worry about her, because she did not plan to drag him into trouble. Nina rushed towards the girl in fear, asking her the reason why she was going to leave now. Mirren said in frustration that this question was stupid because she understood that her presence here was harming everyone. Nina stopped her and said that it was not a problem for her in the guild. Mirren just turned around in surprise, not understanding what the guild worker was getting at. Nina immediately switched to Randall, pointing a finger at the guy. She said that the problem here was completely different and much more serious. Randall lied to the guild. The girl continued to scream, saying that Randall should understand such moments very well, because he made a false report. The necromancer tried to apologize somehow, saying that he was very sorry. Nina, still angry and dissatisfied, went to the door and said that since Randall understood everything, she was forced to report everything to the guildmaster. The girl asked everyone to remain in their places. Afterwards, they all went together to see the guildmaster. Nina opened the door slightly as she entered and immediately apologized to the master for disturbing him. Nina addressed the man in the chair, calling him Mr. Gillen. She said that she had brought Randall. The young man was surprised to hear that name again under such circumstances. Guildmaster Giller rose from his chair and turned to the boys. The man said with a smile that they hadn't seen Randall for a long time. The boy explained to Mirren that he hadn't expected Gillen to return. Gillen came closer and looked closely at Mirren, noticing that this was the girl who was mentioned in the exam. He bowed slightly and said that he was glad to meet her, then introduced himself by name again. The man guessed that Mirren was a high-ranking demon. Mirren chuckled, saying that the man had a diamond eye. She then added that he was right, because she was a vampire lord. Gillen looked at Randall and told him that it looked like the boy had brought a big shot here. Then he asked if Randall was related to her or something. Randall began to very hesitantly try to find the right words, when Mirren immediately intervened, saying that none of this mattered because the most important thing was that Randall was her friend. Gillen smiled at that answer, telling Randall that it did indeed look like the boy had made a good friend, which Randall immediately agreed with. Afterwards, Gillen said that there was one more thing he had to say. Randall didn't like the way the man suddenly became so serious, after which the guildmaster knelt down in front of the young man. Gillen said in a sad voice that he was very sorry. The man added that if he had been much more competent, everything could have turned out completely differently. Randall rushed towards Gillen, extending his hand to help him up. The man began to apologize, to which the necromancer immediately said that there was no need for that. Randall worriedly asked the man if everything would be okay in the future, and if there would be any problems after the incident that happened on their exam field. Gillen started to stand up, holding his knees, and immediately replied that Randall need not worry about it. The man also added that thanks to Lord Cecilium, it was not a big problem. The man said he must have been very lucky when he refused to issue the hero's certificate to Fado earlier. Randall asked who the Lord was, to which Gillen replied that he was a border guard who ruled the region. Gillen asked the boys to sit down, then said that there was more information about Fado and the others. The man said that he was sorry, but he could not forbid them from further activity because they were S rank. The conversation between Gillen and Randall continued. When they sat down, Mirren immediately saw the confectionery, which could not leave the girl indifferent. Randall began to learn what would happen to his former team. Gillen said that they would be under house arrest, but even with all this he could not ignore Loig, who definitely needed to be punished. Randall slowly began to drawing out what Gillen meant by the word punishment. The master said that he would take away his license and, apparently, the knight would not be able to return to his order. Jilin apologized again, saying that the punishment he had chosen was quite light. However, he noted that it was a convenient outcome for Randall. Randall, who was trying to find out more about everything, asked the meaning of the master's words. Gillen took a sip of tea and said that, to be honest, it was like cutting off the tail of a lizard. The man took a few more sips, and then began to put the cup back. He also added that Lord Cecilium and he had come to the conclusion that they did not want to devote much attention to this matter. Afterwards, Gillen explained that regarding Loic, the government was also partly to blame for forcing this knight on them. The guys should have used the fact that everyone was demoted to A rank. Finally, Gillen added that now that there were 3 of them in their group, they would hardly be able to take any quests. Mirin continued to gobble up the cookies, not listening to the dialogue at all. Gillen once again started talking about Fado, who was already an A-rank knight. The 2 girls in his group could be the best in their respective roles, since they were stronger than normal adventurers. However, although they were good at being the vanguard and support, they couldn't do much on their own. Gillen seriously doubted that there were any adventurers who would lend them a hand now. Nina joined in, saying that because of the bad rumors that had spread after the Randall incident, people who were weaker than them had become reluctant to come near, as they were afraid. Gillen also said that they had no other choice, so he thinks they realized their mistakes, but nevertheless, he is still sorry. Afterwards, the man asked the guys to hide their identities. Mirin said she didn't mind, but was it because she was a vampire? Gillen replied that it was because of the people in high-ranking positions who might not like it. Gillen looked at the adventurers and said that he really wouldn't want them to have any new problems, which, it would seem, the guys already had enough of. Gillen smiled broadly and said that if the girl was comfortable saying she was human, then there was no need to make a mountain out of a molehill. Besides, he noted that he liked the girl. Randall, as soon as the guildmaster said these words, immediately turned to Mirin and said that he meant it. The guy added that vampires are no longer hostile creatures in the eyes of humans. Randall smiled warmly and said that now the girl could see for herself that not all people were bad, as she had previously believed. Mirin smiled back and said that he was right. Gillen scratched his head and apologized to the boys for interrupting them. The guildmaster lit a cigarette and said that it was time to discuss the main reason why the boys were here now. Gillen said that Randall had some task that the boy had to complete upon his return, namely, exploring the dragon graveyard. Randall, of course, did not understand at first what location exactly was being discussed. Gillen repeated, continuing to smoke, and said that it was necessary to explore it and close all questions about this place. It was a personal request from Lord Cecilium. Randall said he was honored. Mirin didn't know about this place at all and started asking the boys about it. Gillen was surprised that the girl had never heard of this cemetery before. The man began to explain, saying that a brave warrior had killed a giant dragon long ago. The mountainous area to the north where the remains of this monster lay was called the Dragon Graveyard. Mirin then asked the reason why the dragon's bones were left there. Initially, Mirin simply thought that the skeleton was too big or too heavy. Gillen simply said that the warriors of that time did not even have the strength to defeat such a powerful creature. Therefore, there was no talk of transporting him. The dragons were really so huge that even if they killed one now, the master was still not sure that they would be able to carry his body. As a result, the bones left there became part of the area. The colossal amount of magic contained in these remains poisoned the air around them. This had a devastating effect on the landscape. Gillen also mentioned the priests who regularly brought various gifts there, but now, in fact, they are under house arrest. After the guildmaster mentioned the same punishment that had been meted out to his former group, Randall immediately realized that Gillen was talking about Quella. In conclusion, Gillen said that this was the very reason he asked to bring the boys to his office. He did not think that this would be bad news for the boys. The master also added that even if they tried to hide the fact that Mirin was a vampire, the group would still find out, but house arrest would help shut those annoying people up. Randall thought for a moment, then said that other than Quella, who was a holy disciple, he was probably the best person for this. Besides, it was a good opportunity to demonstrate his vampire abilities. Randall, after thinking it over, said that with his detective skills, he could not guarantee the mission would be completed. Gillen was surprised, after which Nina said that it was time to voice the truth. Gillen thought this was indeed the right moment. The man folded both hands and addressed Randall, lowering his tone slightly. The master asked that Randall not tell anyone what he was about to hear. The guildmaster said that the Dragon Graveyard is the only place on their continent where you can go back to the past. This is what makes the location unique. Randall was getting more curious now, so the boy leaned over and said that the guild had determined that there was an anomaly in the cemetery. If that was true, then the boy knew where this inquiry was heading. Gillen said the guy had the right idea. They wanted to ask Randall to destroy a zombie dragon, which is one of the largest dragons in history. Randall shouted out that the guild must have an idea on how to defeat him. Mirren interjected that it was too risky and very serious. Afterwards, Mirren smiled and said that they would have no problems with them. The girl also added that they were slightly overestimating the danger. In the end, Randall also agreed, saying that it would be an honor for them. Gillen smiled and said that he was confident that the quest would go well. The master added that the guild should work as usual, so they would send a detachment of swordsmen with them. Nina also shouted out, being delighted with the guy, that everything will definitely be fine with Mr. Randall. She argued that the guy has a unique profession. Randall was surprised when he heard about the uniqueness. Nina explained that she had done a little research on necromancers, and it turned out that there were currently 0 adventurers in the guild who were registered as necromancers. Randall asked if his ability was really that rare. Nina exclaimed that it was. Those with unique professions always had exceptional abilities. Nina almost immediately gave the example of the ability, Demon King, as well as Hero. This also includes sages and saints, and also Limones, who was here earlier. Randall continued to doubt that he could stand in line with such individuals. Mirren, however, took the guy by the hand and said that if it came to a fight, then together they would definitely cope. Gillen also confirmed everything, calming the guy down. The man said that Randall now has strong allies. Afterwards, he smiled and said that he really counts on Randall and Mirren. Randall was really worried, but there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Everyone believed in the guy. I think he is a new unique star who will leave his mark. He knew he couldn't betray that trust. At least the boy could try not to be ashamed of it. Randall said he was in and would do his best. It was all decided. Randall and Mirren were about to set out. When everyone left the guild, Mina and Gillen saw the boys off, wishing them that adventurers would be more careful in the cemetery. The travelers set off on their journey, and after walking a few kilometers away from the guild, Randall noticed that he hadn't noticed anything at all. It turned out that Mirren couldn't fly and move at the same time. The girl explained that flying does not waste her magic supply if she moves short distances, but if the distance is really long, it is better to walk. After that, Mirren said that she was already a little tired of being on the road all the time. Randall supported her, and then suggested making a pass near the forest. Mirren sat down on a rock and asked how much longer they had to go. Randall exhaled and said that they were almost halfway there. The guy also added that they would stop in the city of Aden on the way. Mirren added that they would need to prepare well for the upcoming task, because the dragon was a serious opponent. Suddenly she remembered something else. Mirren decided to ask Randall about sleeping dragons, graveyards, and how to make a research request. She wanted to know more about all of this, and the necromancer did not refuse her. The girl was surprised that Randall actually agreed. The guy started to say that firstly, regarding the request for research, the purpose of the research is what will be discovered during its course. By the way, regarding this, basically research requests are group tasks for which there is practically no reward. There are 2 types of research, and they are assigned to those who are trusted more. Randall also said that they were given a special request, and that is why they must do everything so that their reputation does not suffer. Mirren shook her head and said that she understood that. As for the dragons, it was the most beloved and popular fairy tale among children. Randall himself was curious whether all this coincided with their version of the legend. Again, none of this changes the fact that dragons did exist in the past. Once upon a time, all living creatures feared and trembled before these formidable creatures. Instead of destroying villages, the dragon would give the village fresh dew once a year. If the villagers did not protect it, or if he did not like something, the dragon would say that he would bring misfortune to the village. It was for this reason that the inhabitants were very afraid of the dragon. Over time, people began to treat this creature the same way as any other deity. But one day the dragon wanted to visit a neighboring empire. The people of this country were not as obedient as the villagers, and, as a result, the dragon was defeated. Mirren was delighted with this story. The girl said that it was the heroes who saved everyone then. Randall answered that this was not so, because the empire had outstanding power, there were just many people there, and only one dragon. And then came the hero, whose name thundered across the continent. Mirren thought for a moment and said that what she had heard earlier was different from what Randall was saying now. Randall continued, saying that this brave man was a living legend of the village, and then they came with the dragon to the Empire and destroyed it almost completely. Then a meeting was held in the village, and the Council of Elders decided that the village should continue to worship the dragon. It was then that the dragon gained the power of harmony. Thus the dragon, who was a god for only one village, became even more revered because he destroyed an empire that the villagers themselves perceived as a threat. After his death, he became even more revered. Mirin became curious and asked about the reason why the dragon died. Randall replied that some say that he reached his limit in the war against the Empire, and others that he was killed by the locals. Randall added that there is a certain charm to this. Some dragons have been described as protective, while others are said to be vicious and aggressive creatures. Well, there were many theories, but in any case, the dragon is dead, or rather, the dragon from the story about the Empire. The only thing that is known for sure is that the heroes really existed. Suddenly, Randall raised his index finger and said that he would tell the girl what the cemetery looked like. He said in a tense voice that it was a dangerous land, full of miasma. Some adventurers have discovered demons living there, and some go there to make medicine from the dragon's bones. The miasma is so thick that there is as little light as in a deep dungeon. There were also rumors that anything could happen in this place, which was the reason the guild sent them. Mirin said that she now understood what Jilin and Nina meant. After this story, Mirin jumped up from the stone and said that if everything is really as Randall says, then we need to move. The necromancer asked the girl if she was okay. Mirin replied that the only way to know for sure was there. Then she smiled and said that, besides, they weren't alone. Randall smiled and said that she was right. After a couple more hours of travel, Randall, Mirin, and the two spirits finally arrived in the city of Aden, where Randall had previously suggested stopping for a comfortable night's stay. The city itself was full of life. Its streets were filled with a variety of people and all other races, werewolves, elves, beastmen, and even sea creatures. Such abundance even slightly confused Mirin, who watched all this in surprise. Randall stroked his Fenrir and said that he would have to go back for a while. The guy used the skill Coffin for the Dead and hid the spirit. The guy saw Mirin's face and asked what was bothering the girl. Mirin said that she didn't know there were so many non-humans here. Randall smiled and said that this is a peculiarity of the city. There really are many species living here, so there is no discrimination, persecution, and everyone lives in peace. The necromancer turned to Mirin and asked the girl if she liked this nice town, in the guy's opinion. Mirin smiled and said that she probably did, because it was really great here. Afterwards, Randall said that they should take a short break, buy supplies, and have a snack. Then he remembered something. He turned to Mirin and asked her if she would have any problems eating regular food. Mirin laughed and said that there would be no problem. The girl immediately clarified that she meant that she did not need food at all. Then she said that it was quite convenient. The girl said that instead she feeds on cosmic energy. In this regard, vampires were similar to demons. And the most effective way to replenish strength is to drink human blood. Randall smiled awkwardly and said that it seemed that blood was better. Mirin laughed again, telling him not to worry. She had said that it wasn't the only way. Mirin added that she can get magic elements from human food as well. She doesn't have to waste time eating, and she can also spend that time searching for the magic element. Randall thought that the girl didn't need to eat then. Mirin snapped at him, saying that she hadn't said that at all because the girl thought human food was fine. The girl said that she especially liked the cookies. They were simply magical because Mirin needed only one thing to gain power. Randall laughed, saying that he was glad about this. The boys moved on. A few hours earlier, Randall's former team was sitting in their room and continuing to quarrel, starting, as always, with Loig's initiative. The knight was rushing around the room their group had rented. Fado asked the guy what had happened and where he was going in such a hurry. Loig said that he knew where Randall was heading now. Loig solemnly declared that it was a dragon graveyard. Fado looked at him dully, asking again. The knight said that it was indeed so, and Randall was already halfway there. Quella immediately shouted that they couldn't go after him, since they were under house arrest. The girl was afraid of the consequences that could await the group if the guild found out about their departure. Mail joined the conversation and firmly said that if they showed such activity, they would have a chance to clear their names and reputations in the eyes of the people. Loig raised a finger and said that everyone was talking about exploring the dragon graveyard, but that wasn't the only thing people did there. Jilin remained silent, but it was an act to make the information seem credible. Fado just smiled and said that this had become an annual occurrence. All this talk about zombie dragons is a great topic for anyone looking for a thrill. Mail started to say that it was unlikely that Loig had come running here just to tell about some rumors. The knight smiled and said that this time, everything was different there. Loig began to lead up to everything he wanted to say. The knight said that if the dragon really did suddenly rise again, then the guild would have to turn to their saint, Quella, for help anyway. Quella responded hesitantly. Loig pointed at her and said that only she could defeat this monster. Quella immediately lowered her head and began to think about Randall's companion. Loig came closer and threw his arm over Quella's shoulder. The guy began to provoke the saint, saying that she was afraid, it was just a zombie dragon. Loig also added that if they ignored this news, the country would be in trouble. It would be a great honor for him if they could prevent this together. When Mail did not support Loig's courage, saying that all this would end badly, the knight switched to the leader of the group, Fado, and asked what he thought about all this. Fado, who was immediately lost in thought, immediately fell into his old and recent memories. The guy was still bothered by the fact that Randall was constantly surpassing him. Fado dangled his arms and sat on the edge of the bed, saying that it was unlikely that the dragon would actually be reborn. But if it did happen, they would really need Quella's help. Loig continued to press Quella. The girl clenched her hands and thought that if she did everything in her power, they would all be saved. No one would have any problems after that. Quella gathered her thoughts and confidently shouted that she would do it if necessary. Loig raised his hand and said that now they would force the guild to accept them back. While the group was rejoicing and preparing to leave for the dragon graveyard, Gion sat in his office, giving his men a new assignment. The man quietly said, looking at the portrait, that he was getting what he deserved. It was a poster with a portrait of Loig, announcing that the boy had been stripped of his heavy knight's license. It was also a report to Lord Cecilium. Randall and Mirren were walking through the city. The girl said in admiration that there were so many people here. He asked her worriedly if she was okay. The guy was very worried about her. He couldn't understand how she felt in a crowd of people. Mirren smiled widely and answered that as long as no one showed aggression towards her, everything was fine. She came closer to him and grabbed the guy's hand. The girl looked into his eyes and happily said that if he was so worried, then holding his hand, they would look natural and everything would be fine. All the boys looked at Randall with a glare. Mirren grabbed his hand tightly and ran with the boy down the street. Randall looked at the happy Mirren and awkwardly told her not to hurry. Their food wasn't going to run away. The girl pointed ahead and happily shouted for him to look. It looked very tasty. Mirren was in complete euphoria from the new place and the people around her. She liked everything. Randall was amazed by her happy face. He had never seen so much joy from simple food. He decided not to answer anything but just run with the girl. He awkwardly thought, okay, he will go with her. The girl and the boy stopped at a counter with a huge fish. Mirren asked the boy standing next to her about everything with great interest. Then they went into a store with clothes. Then Mirren and Randall went to the street vendors who sell snacks. Mirren smiled widely and looked at Randall happily. The boy smiled back at her. Her happiness was transmitted to him. He couldn't help but smile back at Mirren. Mirren and Randall rode on Ray to the dragon graveyard. The wolf carefully carried his master and his girlfriend. Randall got off the wolf and looked around in surprise. The girl was in no hurry to get off. Mirren said that here they were. This is the mountain where the dragon graveyard is. The guy said that he was very grateful to Ray for the ride. Randall closed his eyes and awkwardly said that it was good that he had come here on Ray. He would have to practice his wings so as not to burden Ray too much. Mirren decided to support her friend and said that from what she had seen earlier, he had already mastered them and would soon be able to master them. He replied that he hoped so. Mirren, Randall, and Ray walked down the path to their destination. Mirren nervously said that it was so dark here. He said that it was. It was even worse now than the last time he visited. Mirren asked him in surprise that he had been in this place before. Randall looked at the girl and asked if there was a reason for the algae to grow so much. Mirren told him confidently that it was the remains of a magical creature. Such things usually became undead if left to rot. The girl asked him his own question. She asked if there was a reason for the algae to grow so much. Randall awkwardly replied that there was. He should have been given a proper burial. Randall looked at Mirren and asked loudly what she meant by holding back her power too. Randall added that it was no wonder Gillen wanted them to do it. Mirren replied that yes. She meant that the original magic was too dark. They couldn't just leave it like that. Randall thought that if a demon or adventurer came here and created a powerful monster or something, there was a danger that it would become a demon king. The boy continued to reason that he wouldn't jump to conclusions just yet. Mirren said that it seemed like they had everything under control. Mirren said that the device creates healing air and turns weak creatures into undead. The girl added that it is quite effective. The girl said that it is possible because the dragon is running out of magic. Randall asked with interest that she is getting weaker and the device is getting stronger. Mirin looked to him and asked that the closer to the flame, the warmer. The girl added that it was the same principle. Randall asked that then there was nothing wrong with leaving him alone. Mirin said that if they didn't take action, she thought for a moment and said that if they made a mistake, this dragon, he would upset the delicate balance. Mirin looked closely at the guy, who looked at her in surprise. The girl quickly said that the fastest way to defeat him was to direct his own energy at himself and hit him at the moment of resurrection to defeat him for sure. Randall screamed in shock that it was impossible. The guy asked if they had any other options they could use. Mirin exhaled and said she didn't know. The girl asked the guy if he could resurrect the dragon at all. Randall said he wasn't sure, but he could try with this grimoire. The girl said she understood everything. Mirin asked him if he was interested in this option. The guy blushed and shouted loudly that he was not. The girl said that they would have to weaken him anyway. Mirin continued saying that by turning off the device with the healing air, she would emit it. This was necessary to check the dragon's condition and protect herself from dragon addictions. Randall said that it was time for them to start sorting everything out. Mirin said that he was as enthusiastic as yesterday. No problem, he would soon get used to it and would be able to control his self-confidence. The guy asked in surprise if it was true. Mirin answered that it was. The girl raised her hand and opened a passage in front of them, which was surrounded by darkness. They only need to go through it. Randall said that was great. The girl smiled and said that they would get it done in no time. They entered the tunnel the girl had created. The boy told her that he hoped she was right. They passed it and found themselves in a huge field with a huge skeleton lying on it. Randall said that here they were. They came closer to the skeleton. Mirin said that although the amount of restorative air was reasonable, there was a lot of it now. Randall asked the girl how long they were counting on. The girl touched the skull and said that if they did not take care of it, in a few decades, maybe 100 years, the magic would run out and they would return to normal life. Mirin added that maybe they should just impose a ban in that area or something. Randall responded that he completely agreed with her. Mirin said that now they needed to make sure there were no other creatures nearby. Randall smiled and said that he would take care of that. Necromancy would solve that problem. Mirin said that she thought he was right. The girl screamed loudly that she was counting on him. The guy confidently answered her that yes, he would take care of it. Randall's former team watched them from the bushes. Loig asked what it meant, then Rand. Quella asked what it was Fenrir. The boy replied that it must be a long-haired wolf. Quella said that its size was most likely a result of evolution, although some legendary tamers were known to enhance their pets to make them stronger. Loig asked angrily, what nonsense, how can Randall be a legendary tamer? The visibility is still bad. He asked Quella that she is a saint, can she do something about it? Fado said sullenly that they had to deal with the dragon anyway. They would check on him. Loig said that he would have to do everything again. Quella said that everything was completely different from before. Loig ran ahead and shouted for them to follow him, no need to hesitate. Quella shouted for him to wait. Fado let out a tired breath and followed them. Loig placed his hand on the device and said they would get down to business. Quella asked him in shock what he was doing. Fado shouted that they were here to explore, and if the dragon came, they had to defeat it before anyone else. It looked like it wouldn't be back for decades, there was nothing they could do about it. Loig asked if he had any idea what they were going through. Loig said that of course they were here now because of Rand, and because of him, their S-rank group was in danger of being disbanded. Mail said that without Frigo Loig can't become an adventurer. The boy angrily shouted at her to shut up. Without a vanguard, they wouldn't achieve much anyway. Fado said he knew what was going on. The boy asked what they could do. Loig laughed and said angrily that he knew. If it weren't for him, Fado would still be a rank. Mail said that if there was an interesting way to get to A-level, Loig was definitely the best. The guy said that all she did was say irrelevant things. Loig said angrily that they should just wake him up and chop him into pieces. Fado said that it seemed they had no choice. Mail groaned sadly, but said nothing. Quella looked at her friends in shock. She screamed loudly for them to stop. They couldn't do this, they couldn't let the dragon wake up. Loig smiled evilly and told the girl that he didn't think she wanted to be remembered as the most incompetent saint in history who had so cruelly betrayed her people. If it came to that, of course. He added that he was sure that the sisters who raised her would be very upset by her actions. Loig put his hand on her shoulder and said that it was inevitable, they would defeat the dragon and become heroes. The boy asked if it wouldn't be better to secure the status of a miracle-working saint in practice. Quella thought about her sisters and the little children she cared for. The girl said irritably that it was fine. She understood everything. She would do it. Bloig patted her on the back and said that it was good. She shouldn't worry. Hundreds of years had passed. There was nothing dangerous about this dragon. Fado asked the girl if she could handle it. Quella confidently replied that yes, she would figure it out. No problem. Besides, Loig was right. It had been hundreds of years. The girl added that she didn't think he would be a big problem. Loig cried out happily that that was what he was talking about. He was too big to recover that quickly. Quella placed the cross to her forehead and began to pray. Black smoke began to emerge from the device, surrounding the dragon's skeleton. Loig asked how long it would take. The girl said that it would take almost all of it. Quella stood up from the ground and said happily that everything was fine now. The smoke began to come out of the car more intensely. The girl lost control over it. Loig loudly asked what happened. Males screamed that they had taken control. Fado asked that they had interrupted her. Loig angrily asked that he hoped that the dragon had returned. The girl screamed that, yes. Quella said in horror that she did not expect that there was a strong mage nearby. She remembered Randall's friend and thought how strong she could be. Fado screamed hysterically that if there was anyone here besides Rand, they could see them. They should leave here. The heroes stood opposite each other. Male took out her wand and said that they would disappear now. She added that she would get rid of the traces, then they had to escape. Loig shouted that this is what he was talking about. They can do anything if they want. They need to get out of here while they can. They started to run away. Fado said something about the dragon. Loig asked that Rand was nearby. Why don't they just attack him while he was lying there? Dragons have such powers. Quella replied that she thought Rand could defeat him alone. Loig angrily said that then everything would be fine. Everyone looked at him in horror, but did not answer. They ran out of the forest. Mirren looked at the forest intently. Randall asked excitedly what was going on. The girl didn't answer and took off. The boy opened his wings and wondered if he could catch up with her. Mirren and Randall landed near the device. The girl said angrily that they had run away. Randall asked in surprise that they had run away, but who was she talking about? Mirren said there was something wrong with the device, so she flew in to take a look. There was no trace of them left. The guy angrily asked who they were, what she was even talking about. Randall exhaled and said okay, no matter. He asked if the dragon's corpse was okay now. If the device was broken, then the healing energy probably wasn't being released properly. Mirren said that was more important, of course. They should go back and check. The girl came closer to the skeleton. Randall mentioned that he needed her to research the dragon. Mirren said fine. The girl carefully examined the huge skeleton. The remains had received too much healing energy. The dragon had already begun to revive. Its final awakening was a matter of time. Randall asked if there was anything they could do. She said they needed to reduce its size. The guy asked when it would wake up. Mirren said maybe in a few minutes. Randall said it didn't look like they'd have time to organize a strike team. The girl said confidently that they'd have to handle him themselves. Randall asked wearily if they could win. Mirren extended her hand to him and replied that they didn't have to defeat him. The boy asked her in surprise what she meant. Mirren told him to look at his condition. He won't live long after resurrection. Randall asked what she meant, that he could be left alone. The girl replied that they had a maximum of half an hour. His energy would only be enough to damage the nearby city if it was enough. Randall shouted loudly that they couldn't allow that. Mirren said, of course. If his body was destroyed, he would only be able to exist in a state of spirit. That's when his turn would come. The guy asked her in surprise what she meant. The girl smiled broadly and said necromancy. She asked if this wasn't a good time. They heard a loud roar. Randall said it started. The birds began to leave the forest. Mirren said loudly that they had 30 minutes. Their job was to distract him during that time. The guy replied that he understood. The dragon appeared in front of them. The girl screamed loudly that they were starting. The monster let out a terrible roar. The dragon roared loudly, causing the ground to shake. Randall said in shock that this was a zombie dragon. Mirren looked at the monster in horror. The dragon landed on the ground and walked towards them. The monster was covered in wounds, from which bones were sticking out. The dragon raised his paw high, on which were sharp claws. Mirren screamed loudly for Rand to dodge. The dragon extended its clawed paw towards the boy. The girl screamed his name. She wanted him to get away from the attack. Randall thought in shock that something was wrong with his body. He can't move now. Ray and Ace stood in front of their master and began to attack the monster. They began to attack him more and more. The dragon raised his paws and roared loudly in pain. Ray and Ace looked at their master with a smile. They were glad that they could help him. Randall smiled and told them that he thanked them very much for their help. They saved his life. The dragon looked at them angrily and growled loudly. He was furious that he was attacked. He hit Randall, but he managed to escape from the blow. The guy thought that this time he managed to dodge. Randall shouted at the girl that his body was not obeying him. He angrily asked what was just happening. Mirin told him that the dragon had intimidation. He should watch him closely during the attack. He could make it so that he could not move. Randall answered that it was fine. The girl flew up and headed towards the dragon. She angrily shouted at the monster that he not only possessed strong magic, let him receive it from her. Mirin created a huge black ball and threw it at the dragon, screaming for it to eat it. The monster roared loudly in pain. It was wounded by Mirin's powerful blow. Randall wondered in shock that it had worked. Mirin screamed at him to stay calm. The dragon was up and ready to strike again. He waved his tail, but they managed to dodge. Miraz said irritably that they seemed to anger him. They should use up his magic supply. Randall asked in surprise that she meant to perform a magical attack. Mirin hit the dragon again. She said that she couldn't say if it would work. Randall asked that she was sure of it. Mirin hit the dragon again. The monster screamed loudly. The girl shouted at her friend to be quiet already. The boy thought uncomfortably that he seemed to be just getting in the way. The dragon opened his mouth wide to swallow Mirin. She screamed with a smile for him to try it. She threw a magic ball into his mouth. The dragon staggered a little and growled softly. He turned and began to walk away from Mirin. Randall asked in shock that he was running away. Mirin said that she thought she had gone a little overboard. Randall asked hysterically that she had go a little overboard. The boy saw clouds gathering above the dragon. Randall shouted loudly that he was calling for thunder lightning. Lightning struck the dragon, and he screamed loudly. The guy proudly said that thunder lightning is part of the magic of the great sage. Mirin happily said that it was a great job. The monster got angry and headed towards them. The girl said loudly that they would fight like adults. Randall asked in surprise what she wanted to say. He had been holding back until now. Mirin replied that he didn't want to waste his magic just like that. Mirin glared at the monster and told her friend that he was attacking. Randall stood behind her and looked at what was happening in surprise. He couldn't understand what was going to happen now. The dragon only became angrier from the fact that some girl had hurt him like that. Randall thought in shock that it couldn't be. He was attacking again. Rays of light began to emerge from the dragon. The dragon froze for a moment, and then beams of light began to hit the ground and burn everything in their path. Randall and Mirin tried to dodge all the attacks, but it was very difficult since there were so many beams. Someone screamed loudly. The scream could be heard from the forest. People were in trouble, and judging by the volume of the screams, something terrible had happened that scared them. Randall asked his friend in shock that someone had been in the forest. Mirin flew past him and answered irritably that now was not the time to think about them. Randall asked what kind of attack it was. The girl, without taking her eyes off the dragon, answered that it was called the Breath of Death, but with one peculiarity. Unlike ordinary dragons, his attack brings instant death. The dragon opened his mouth wide, from which drops of fire began to fall. He was preparing another strong attack that would defeat Randall and Mirin. The girl turned to her friend and excitedly shouted at him to dodge. Randall stared in shock at the dragon who created a fiery vortex. The boy watched as the fire approached him. He thought in horror that he would not have time to bend now, and his transformation in the Night King would not help either. Randall continued to reason. He thought irritably that he could not do anything. The boy resigned himself to his fate and said that he was going to die now. Mirin appeared in front of them, shielding him with her body. The boy didn't want Mirin to protect him at the cost of her own life. He had already resigned himself to death. She smiled and looked at him. She added that this was why she would be with him until the end of his days. They hadn't tried many things yet. She didn't want him to die here. Randall worriedly asked his friend if she was okay. The girl pointed at the dragon and told Randall to look at it. The dragon sat on the ground, and smoke came out of its mouth. Mirin hesitantly said that it seemed like it had used up all its magic. The hero wanted to tell her something, but didn't have time. The girl interrupted him and confidently shouted that yes, now was the time to act. She created a magic ball and said that she had to pave the way for the Night King. Just let him not dawdle. Randall confidently shouted that it was good. The boy quickly ran towards the dragon. Mirin and Randall cast a spell at the same time and shouted that they were now using the Night King to defeat the dragon. A black ball of magic began to form around the dragon. It gradually began to envelop the monster. First, the dragon's wings were covered in black magic, and then the rest of its body. There was an explosion, and the dragon roared loudly from the pain he was experiencing. He was too tired to fight and struggle. Mirin said that they had succeeded. The dragon disappeared, and in its place appeared bats that flew into the sky. There was a loud explosion, and nothing remained in place of the dragon. Mirin and Randall won. The guy happily said that it was just great. Mirin smiled widely and told her friend that in the end, they managed it together. They had done it. Randall nervously said that, no, that wasn't true. It was mostly her merit. Thanks to her they were able to defeat the dragon. The girl exhaled and answered that it was only for now. The guy asked excitedly that she was not hurt. Mirin smiled and mockingly asked who he took her for. The girl decided to use a spell. She said that she was using the King of the Night. The girl was surrounded by black magic, and all her wounds and scratches healed. Mirin glowed and joyfully shouted that she was back in action. She was completely healthy and could go into battle again. Randall awkwardly said that she really knew how to surprise. The girl told him that if he was going to practice necromancy, now was the time. The boy said yes, that's right. Randall opened the book and touched it. He said loudly to come back to life. Mirin asked him with interest what was going on. Was everything working out? Randall confidently replied that everything was fine. In front of them was a dragon that looked very healthy. The resurrection of the ancient dragon, Great Calamity, had been successful. The ancient dragon, Great Calamity, was now available for use. Mirin cried out happily that it was just wonderful. It worked. Mirin confidently said that it was now a full-fledged young dragon. Randall asked in shock what a dragon it was. The guy said that the dragon would be bigger than the wyverns they usually ride. Randall asked curiously that Great Disaster wasn't his name, was it? The girl replied that he was right. That was what he was called before. I think he would want him to give him a new name. The dragon growled in agreement. Randall replied that was fine then. He walked closer to the dragon and asked what about Earl. The dragon's eyes widened in surprise. Earl purred in agreement. He leaned over to Randall and began to hug him. The boy stroked him happily. Mirin smiled and said that he seemed to like the name. Earl Great Calamity has received new. The unique skill he received is Champion of the Night King. Additional skills are Dragon's Blessing, Dragon Fight. He also received the skills of Dragon's Breath. Additional skills are Dragon's Blessing, Dragon Fight, Dragon's Breath. The girl asked the guy with interest if he had acquired any skills. Randall looked in the book and answered that yes, 1 unique skill and 3 additional ones. The guy added that he had another unique skill. He was starting to look like a monster. Mirin angrily screamed that it was rude. She asked that there was plenty of room. Why don't they practice a little? Randall said that was a good idea. The boy shouted loudly for Earl to get ready, to use the dragon's breath. The monster purred happily. Mirin looked at the boy with a smile and thought that he was getting stronger. Randall happily shouted to Earl that everything was fine, let him continue. The boy skillfully led his friend, who listened to him without question. Mirin continued to reason that she was getting stronger with him. Randall was full of surprises. The sun was already starting to set. Randall sat down tiredly on the ground and said that they were taking a break. Mirin looked at him with interest. The girl was floating in the air at that time. She asked her friend with interest how many unique skills he already had. Randall replied that he had 4 skills, I think. Mirin asked in shock that he had 4 skills. She said irritably that usually if a person has even 1, they are already considered to be among the strongest beings. Randall scratched his head awkwardly and asked if that was true. Mirin angrily asked that he didn't understand anything at all. The girl said that unique skills were valuable if he knew how to use them. She went on to say that they weren't used for any specific purpose. They were like personal symbols. Randall asked what that meant. Mirin replied that the Dark Lord he received this time was equivalent to her Night King, a skill that affected everything that happened after sunset. The girl screamed angrily, which was difficult to explain. Randall thought awkwardly that he had not understood anything. The guy asked if she could paint him a picture later of what she was capable of now. Mirin happily replied that it was a good question. His dark magic had increased significantly, and he could now take control of the enemy's magic. That was how she turned the influx of air into an ebb. The boy asked her again in shock. Randall loudly asked what she had just said, that he could interfere with other people's magic. Miri replied that she had said that. Randall thought in shock that he found it hard to believe. The girl agreed that he must be skilled enough, otherwise he could hurt himself. The guy continued to reason that for some time she would not be able to take control of opponents more advanced in magic. For now, this skill can be considered simply a magical enhancement. Mirin asked what skills he had acquired before. The guy took out a book and said that he would look at it now. He started counting all the skills he had. The girl awkwardly asked how many there were. Randall said, first of all, recovery from food, improved nutrition, recovery from blood. The girl looked at Randall and said that she also had a blood restoration. Not sure if it would be of any use to him. The guy said that this is how it works. Mirin asked him if he still didn't want to start drinking blood. The guy awkwardly replied that he didn't. Randall asked if he could use food recovery and enhanced nutrition. The girl said that if they were enhanced, he would heal and become stronger just by eating something. The guy imagined himself becoming very fat and eating constantly. Randall awkwardly said that it wasn't the best picture. Mirin asked her friend with interest what additional skills he had. Super strength, super reaction, super sense, white flame, lightning, black wings, huge dark magic boost, blood regeneration, dragon's blessing, dragon fight, dragon breath. Mirin asked in shock that he had more than her. He only knows the names anyway. They can talk about dragon skills. She will explain what they are. Mirin said that, firstly, Dragon Blessing is a set of defensive skills. It also protects him from cold and heat. Dragon Fight is an improved version of Intimidation. It is a useful skill. Mirin added that Dragon's Breath, in turn, is an improvement of all attributes. And now he can attack using all attributes at the same time. The White Flame and Lightning are also enhanced by the Dragon's Breath. Randall said in surprise that it was great. That's a very good set of skills. Mirin replied with a smile that she had said he was a real monster. Randall started waving his arms excitedly and shouting loudly that no, it couldn't be. Mirin started to walk away saying that they were done here and it was time to go home. Randall shouted for her to stop. Randall asked why they didn't have fun in the next village. Mirin hesitantly replied that they could. The girl followed the guy, but she hid behind his back. Randall asked what was wrong. The girl said that she was asking for forgiveness. He asked in surprise what she was apologizing for. Mirin asked, upset, that she had gone too far in the fight with the dragon. The girl said that if people saw her, they would think that. Randall remembered how she fought. He understood everything. Mirin said in horror that she was very scared. Randall thought that of course she was scared. If he were in her place, even he would be terrified. The boy put his hands on Mirin's shoulders and said confidently that if she didn't mind, he'd like to know what people had done to her. Randall asked what she would tell him. Mirin looked at him in surprise. She lowered her eyes and replied that it was fine. She will tell him everything. Mirin revealed that she was the only child of a royal vampire family, but soon after her birth, a vampire hunt broke out. Randall looked at her in surprise. The guy told her to stop. She said that no one around her died during her walk. The girl awkwardly replied that she was too young to remember all the events. Mirin added that she was telling it now. She read it in a book. Randall said that it was clear, but it meant. The guy was horrified and thought that her parents had already died. The girl interrupted his thoughts and said with a smile that her parents, by the way, were alive. Most likely, after the shock of that day, they fled and probably abandoned her. Mirin went on to say that in any case, there was no record of anyone being captured or killed by vampire hunters. Randall said that if they were alive, they were probably worried about her. Mirin smiled sadly. She said that she doesn't know where they are now or what they are doing. I think there is a good reason why they can't meet or contact her. Randall asked that she didn't even know where they were. The girl answered with a smile that, unfortunately, she was sure that they were somewhere far away. The guy asked if she was offended or anything like that. Mirin replied that they had no concept of lifespan, and the bond between parents and children was not as strong as in humans. She was neglected as a child, so it's no wonder that her relationship with her parents isn't the warmest. The girl sadly added that they tried to kill her as an infant. Someone sealed her room, so she survived. Randall asked who it could be. Mirin said she didn't know, but she was definitely needed alive. She was in a room with food, clothes, and everything you could want, and instead of toys, there were full bookshelves. At least she was safe there. The guy thought that it must have been strong magic. He went on to reason that if he were a human, he would be a sage. If a demon had locked her up, he would be one of the 4 heavenly kings. Randall asked what was in those books. Mirin replied that they were mostly history books. All the tragedies that had happened to their country, the entire history of this world. In all of them, people were described as the biggest threat. The girl added that this is why she is afraid of people. Randall looked at her and thought that not only had they taken away her parents, but they had also destroyed her homeland. He went on to say that everything Mirin knew outside of her own experience, she had read in books. It's natural for her to be afraid of people. Randall told the girl that it was understandable. The guy asked if he was the first one she believed in. Mirin awkwardly replied that yes, he was human, but he smelled familiar. Randall thought he wanted to dispel the fear of people, but how could he do that? The guy added that let this be the first step. Randall told her that the knowledge she had gained from books was no longer relevant. The girl looked at him in surprise. The guy said that the heyday of vampire hunting had long passed. In their time, people didn't treat vampires so badly. Mirin answered hesitantly that she did. The hero looked at the girl silently. Randall grabbed her hand and ran with her, shouting that it was better to see it with his own eyes than to trust words. She shouldn't worry, everything will be fine. The girl answered that it was fine. She ran with her friend through the forest. They returned to the village. Randall looked at the girl who was hiding behind him. He said that here they came. The people who met them shouted that the heroes were here. The man shouted that it was them. His friend bowed to them and said that he thanked them very much. They were so grateful. Randall asked the girl what she was surprised about. Mirin shouted at the guy that, of course she was surprised. The girl added that she thought that everyone would immediately run away from her appearance. The village elder named Zig came out to them. He said that he was very grateful to them. The man continued to say that he had witnessed them defeat the zombie dragon with his own eyes. Mirin asked in surprise what he was watching them for. Randall said that yes, the guild was currently looking after the dragon graveyard, but that role had originally been filled by their village for generations. Zig said that unfortunately, they wouldn't be able to give them enough attention. They were in the midst of preparing for the festival, and they would be very grateful for their help. Mirin said in surprise that she couldn't believe they accepted her so easily after seeing her fight. Randall replied with a smile that he told her everything was fine. The girl smiled widely and happily shouted yes. Randall watched the girl all evening. He thought that she was so touched by the kindness of these people. Randall went on to reason that gradually Mirin would stop being afraid of people. He sincerely hoped so. At this time, Randall's former team was still in the forest. Fado saw Loig lying on the ground covered in blood. The guy screamed loudly, "What happened?" He started shaking Loig and telling him to wake up. He was the one who brought them here. Quella ran up to them and shouted at Fado not to touch Loig. The girl tried to use the spell several times, but nothing worked. The man remained unconscious. Male approached her and replied that it wouldn't help. The zombie dragon was too strong, it was too late, don't waste your strength. Quella looked at her friend in horror. Fado hit the stone and asked angrily why. The guy thought they saw a risen zombie dragon. They were seized with terrible fear. All they had left to do was run away. Fado asked how Rand could deal with such a monster. He thought they had run away, but Rand stayed. He was strong not only physically, but also mentally, so they had lost. Male asked Fado what they were going to do. The boy screamed hysterically, what could they do? The monster they were supposed to defeat was gone. That monster would have killed them for sure if it weren't for Rand. Quella screamed at him to calm down. The hero froze in horror. Fado thought that he would never surpass Rand. He grabbed his head and muttered that all he did was try to beat Rand. Fado screamed at his friends that they knew about it. He did everything to suppress him as a leader. The guy with tears in his eyes shouted that Rand was actually stronger than him. He continued to scream that they had been making fun of him all this time. Fado asked what they liked about humiliating him. Quella shouted loudly for him to calm down. Fado grabbed the sword and said that it was all over. Quella asked excitedly what they should do. Fado pointed his sword at Loig's body and screamed that this was all because of him. Quella screamed in horror that she was asking him to stop. Fado screamed for her to shut up. The boy chopped off Loig's head with all his might, and it flew off easily. Fado looked at everything he had done in shock. The guy looked at his hands and said that he killed him. Male ran up to him, screaming for him to calm down. The girl said that Loiga wouldn't have survived anyway, he didn't kill him. Male confidently said that now she had an idea. Her friends looked at her with interest. Fado asked what the idea was. Male remembered the happy faces of Mirin and Randall. She looked deeply into the eyes of her comrades and screamed angrily that she would kill Rand. Fado asked in shock that she wanted to kill Rand. He came closer to her and asked that she was sure of her decision. The guy said that they would commit another crime. Male said that the girl with Rand, she is definitely a vampire. Quella and Fado asked in surprise that she was a vampire. Male sternly said that this was her plan. The girl said that the vampire who turned the dragon into a zombie and Rand who killed him, they will kill Rand and sell the vampire to an organization that will stop and lock her up. Fado asked in shock that the organizations, she meant the Sorcerer Association. Male answered confidently that yes, she had some connections with these organizations. The girl continued to say that the Sorcerer Association was quite sensitive to vampires. Their leader is the famous vampire hunter, Myrelle and Tyre. Quella asked what she was saying about Myrelle. There are some bad rumors about her. Male replied that the Sorcerer Society, no, Myrelle still wanted to hunt vampires. The girl added that she only needed information. Fado said that it was clear. The guy asked what about Loig. Fado angrily said that they were the only ones who could bring him to justice, even if they did it now. Male looked at her dead friend and replied that he had no choice. She was sure that many people were worried about his fate. They were sincerely worried. Quella said that this was true. Male asked what would happen if Loig left the ranks of adventurers. Quella replied that Mr. Loig would likely never return to the order. Fado said that, yes, he had done so much for them, he thought the knights would want nothing to do with him. Loig himself had no intention of taking up permanent employment. Quella said that he would have become a bandit or a soldier in another country's army. Male said with a smile that in either case he would have remained an enemy to the order. The girl said that he was a stain on the order's history, so they wanted to get rid of him. She suggests that she should be the one to finish him off. Quella replied that she would never do that. If Loig started fighting for another country or became famous as a robber, it would bring even more shame to the order. They would be willing to kill Loig to solve this problem and never mention it again. Male said that it would probably be quite problematic for them. So now they have a trump card in a conversation with the order. They had a reason to do this before. The girl continued to say that now there are two organizations that do not like vampires and can put pressure on the guilds. The order and the association, they wouldn't dare refuse. Male added that she was sure the church wasn't too fond of vampires either. Quella said that was true, but Male interrupted her and said that they had no choice now. Everyone looked at each other tensely. Male said that they could only return if they finished the job. Quella said that she didn't know, it was all weird. Male said that if they returned, they would definitely be punished. Quella asked in horror that they would die. Fado said irritably, that fine, they could do that. Male lifted Loig's head with her wand. She said that she would take his head. Fado angrily asked why, where they were going anyway. The girl answered that first, they needed to go to Myrelle. At this time, Mirren and Randall came back. The girl happily said that they were finally back. Randall told her that they should visit the guild first. They went inside. Jillian came up to them and happily said that they were back. They had done a good job. Randall looked around the room. He asked if there weren't more adventurers here than usual. Mirren asked with a smile that there must be a reason for that. The boy gasped in surprise. Randall wondered if the guild had received the message about the zombie dragon awakening. Jillian said that, in any case. All the guild workers, including Gillen, bowed deeply to Mirren and Randall. The man loudly shouted that he thanked them very much on behalf of the guild. Randall awkwardly said no. They hadn't done anything. Gillen put his arm around his shoulders and told him not to be modest. Their accomplishments, he had no doubt, would go down in history, so they should accept congratulations. Guyan called Mirren. The girl asked excitedly what was wrong. The man said that she had helped them a lot, thank you. He was sorry that their first order was so difficult. Jillian continued to say that if they had failed, all the people here would have gone after them, and it was not a fact that they would have returned alive. Thank them very much. Mirren was embarrassed at first, but then laughed loudly. She blushed and shouted that they should not thank him, it was nothing. Jillian said that she had already spoken like a real hero. The girl asked in shock that she was a hero. Mirren shouted loudly that yes, he was right, that was for sure. Jillian said with a smile, said that the two of them were allowed to re-evaluate the rank. The man added that after completing this task and killing the dragon, as a special exception, he would promote them both to A rank. People shouted loudly that Randall and his team had done it. They continued to shout that everyone would be promoted to A rank at once. They would like to, and they would take that risk. The man asked what he thought he could do against the zombie dragons. One of the guys shouted that he would die on the spot. Jillian shouted loudly that so would Mirren and Rand, since they had a group of two. He gives them an S rank. People cheered that they were given an S rank. The two of them are in a group without Frito. People kept shouting, whatever this is, it's amazing. They have another S group here. Mirren caught the guy's attention. Randall asked what it was. The girl nervously asked that it was good. Randall replied with a smile, "Of course. Of course." Mirren saw his joy and smiled widely. She screamed yes. Jilin put his arm around the guy's shoulders and said that, well, they had gone to a lot of trouble to gather all these people here and help with the zombie dragons, just like that. The man asked Randall that he understood that it was unforgivable to leave them empty-handed. The guy said that he did. Mirren cried out happily that it was good. The girl added that they would then celebrate in style. Jilin replied with a smile that it was an excellent decision. He turned to all the boys and shouted loudly that they would make a lot of noise today. Mirren was eating delicious food and talking to people. Randall looked at his friend and thought with a smile that he could see that she had already made friends and was having a good time. Gillen looked at the guy with interest and asked how he was now. The man said that he was their hero today, although he probably had nothing to talk about with an old man like him. Randall asked him what he meant. The man said that he found everyone and gathered the group, thanks to him for that. Randall said that it was an accident. Jilin said that he did it anyway. The boy replied that he was grateful for the compliment. The man said that he had nothing to thank him for. Randall pointed to the crowd and asked what he had decided to pretend that this was a goodwill gesture on the part of the guild. Jilin replied that he was strange. He would give him advice to be more suspicious of people. The boy thought that this was being told to him by a man who had betrayed his people, for which he had received a scar on the street. Randall told the man that it was not for him to talk about it. Gillen said it wasn't just him. The negative image of the vampire runs deeper than they think. It's entirely possible that the adventurers of that era are still alive, considering that they weren't all human. Randall said that thanks to him, few people in the guild cared. Gillen chuckled and said that he thought now was a good time to tell him. Randall asked what he wanted to tell him. The man replied that Fado and 3 others had disappeared from their sight. It's entirely his fault, sorry. Randall said excitedly, no, he can't control S-rank groups, no need to worry. Gillen replied angrily that so be it, but he thought they knew what would happen if they ignored his request to give up. It was foolish to hope for that. Randall looked at him carefully and asked what his plan was. Gillen replied that they were sending out a search party. He was sure they had a goal. Perhaps they were planning to bring something back as an achievement. The man continued to say that the villagers they had saved from the dragon had not seen them. Breaking house arrest was not the best idea. Randall said that he understood. Jilin looked at the worried boy and asked what was wrong. Randall said no, it was just a guess, but if it was right, they would have a hard time. The man told him to hurry up and tell everything. Randall quickly said that when they arrived at the dragon graveyard, Mirren said that the dragon was not strong enough to awaken. Guyleen asked in shock what they had just said. The guy replied that they thought that examining the remains would not be a problem, so they were going to do a normal investigation and return home. The man screamed at him to stop. The rebellious dragons were artificially created, so someone could control them. Randall said that couldn't be. He thought that meant Fado and the others. Jilin said it didn't matter. The important thing was that someone was plotting to wake the dragon. Randall said yes. He added, surprised, that meant they could use that mechanism. Jilin said yes, if they got it, they could study it. He added that he would take care of it. Randall thanked him. Jilin patted him on the back and said that he was sorry for keeping him, that he would get his reward tomorrow, and that they could have fun today. He said that was a good idea. The guy approached a group of people. One of them asked him, when he became so strong, there were only 2 of them, maybe they wanted to join them. One of the guys asked Randall where he found such a beautiful girl. Jilin looked at him and said that in the future he would definitely be respected. The next morning, they met near the guild. Mirren told everything she knew. Giller replied that it was clear it was practically the same as what he had heard yesterday. The man looked at the dragon and asked what it was, a resurrected dragon. The monster purred happily. Giller said he wouldn't worry about it, but it would be better not to make it public for now. Randall stroked the dragon and said he thought so too. He remembered something. During the battle, someone was screaming in the forest. Perhaps someone else was involved in the battle. The guy added that most likely those who were there were attacked by the dragon. Giller replied that it was clear. Thanks for the report, he will give them the reward, but before that he has to tell something. Randall asked what it was. Giller said that Lord Cecil wanted to meet one of them. Mirren asked with interest who Lord Cecil was and what he did. Randall answered him. Mirren asked curiously why such an important man wanted to meet them. Giller replied that he assumed the Lord wanted to thank them. The man threw them a bag and said that the remains of the dragon were a problem for him, because his job was to protect the country from demons, and this was their reward. Randall opened the bag and asked in shock that it was gold. Giller replied that no, it was rainbows, and that was much more than gold. The guy screamed in shock that they were given so many rainbows. Giller replied that it was a serious and important task. Its completion was important for Lord Cecil himself. Come to think of it, that amount might be a bit low for a reward for doing it. Randall said, that's how. Giller said that in any case, let them continue in the same spirit. Mirren and Randall looked at each other and shouted, of course. At this time in the forest, not far from the remains of the dragon, Loig's body rose from the ground and began to walk slowly. Heard a noise. He whispered that he wanted to find his head. Randall pulled out the money and asked his friend what they were going to do with all that money. Mirren looked at him and said that she thought dividing the reward wouldn't be a problem. Randall said that yes, that was for sure. Mirren said that even if they don't need them now, they will need them in the future. The guy thought about it and answered that yes. The guy asked if such a time would ever come. Randall exclaimed in surprise that it definitely would. He asked Mirren that maybe they would restore her country. Mirren screamed loudly that there was no need to do that, everything was fine. Randall asked why not. Maybe she could even meet her parents. The girl said she would like to see them, but there was no hurry, and they were still a long way from death. Mirren asked why he didn't buy necromantic equipment. Mirren asked if her cloak had any special properties. Randall replied that his cloak enhanced his dark magic abilities and could make him invisible. The girl said that until they found something specialized, it was best to arm themselves with what they could afford at the moment. Randall asked what about her gear. Mirren replied that she would have to go through every dungeon to find anything better than that. The boy asked what dungeons were. The girl asked if he didn't know about the dungeon destroyed by God. Mirren said that if he could reach the 8th floor of that dungeon, he wouldn't have any problems finding equipment. Randall said that's what their next target is. He doesn't like it very much. The girl said that they don't have to go straight there. But to go into the dungeon you will need special equipment, and it is better to buy it now. Mirren added that she meant that other than the cloak, all of his clothes were quite simple. Randall cried out in surprise that he thought clothes were just cloth. Mirren said loudly that most of the weapons and armor had magical enhancements built into them. She added that he was the only one in the guild who wore a piece of cloth. Mirren exhaled and said that she was afraid that he would need all the equipment he could get. Mirren asked if there were any stores nearby where they could find what they needed. Randall said that they should go to the city of EXILED, where Fado and his friends usually went. The guy asked Earl that they would get there. The dragon purred affirmatively. The boy and the girl sat on the dragon and flew to their destination. Randall shouted happily that they were going. They flew over the forest. Mirren said that the ride was surprisingly comfortable. The guy answered with a smile that she was right. Randall saw a group of people and asked what was going on there. Mirren said loudly that it was the merchant and his escort attacking. Apparently, they weren't going to give up yet. The guy opened his wings and flew down. Mirren asked what he was doing. Randall shouted that he was going to help them. The girl said with a smile that he was a real hero. She opened her wings and flew after the finger. One of the guys yelled angrily that if this continues. Randall asked that they are okay, they need help. The guy yelled in shock, whoever they are, please help them. His friend yelled that they are all B rank. He did not expect to run into the Goblin King here. Randall asked in surprise that they had met the Goblin King. The boy thought that the Goblin King himself was an A rank, of course. A B rank was nothing to him. Randall told the boys that fine, he would take on the Goblin King, and they could continue to protect the merchant. He couldn't handle the Goblin King alone. Randall smiled as he released his assistants and said that there was no need to worry, he was not alone. The guy asked in shock that it was the Minotaur and Fenrir. The girl who was standing next to him said that she never thought that she would encounter them in such a place. The other guy shouted loudly that please let him deal with this Goblin King. Randall smiled and told them to leave the Goblin King to him. He yelled at Ray and Ace that it was time for them to go. Randall called out to Earl and jumped on him. People shouted in shock that it was a dragon. The guy flew to the location of the Orc King. Mirren had already cut off the heads of the monsters. The girl said that, unfortunately, he was too late. Randall approached her and said that she had defeated everyone again. It seemed that he had nothing else to do. Mirren said that she had left him some sweets. Randall asked what kind of sweets. A huge monster approached them. The guy screamed in shock that it was the Goblin King. Mirren said the Goblin King could give him an extra skill. Randall said he knew. The guy told Ray, Ace, that they could leave, thank you very much. The guys who were protecting the merchant came running. One of them said tiredly that they finally caught up with them. His friend asked what was going on. They hid behind the corners. The Goblin King screamed loudly. The guys who were hiding screamed that they were being blown away. One of them asked who they were. The girl and the guy looked so carefree. Randall yelled at Ray, Aim, and Earl to protect the three. The monsters stood around the boys so that nothing would threaten them. One of the boys shouted that there was a Fenrir, a Minotaur, and a dragon. His friend loudly answered him that no, wait. A demonologist is a person who relies on summoned creatures, so Randall loudly shouted that he was summoning white flames. The enemy died. The three guys shouted at the same time that it was impossible. Randall said that he had gotten Charisma of Kings and Growth Increase. The guy said that yes, he had gotten Charisma of Kings, increases the speed of experience growth, I think. He turned to the guys and said that they should go back. One of them said, yeah, they're okay, they were just something right now. The guy came up to them and asked if they were okay, if they weren't hurt. Randall said, okay, they're just glad everyone's okay. The merchant approached them and said that they had saved his life. The merchant was the chairman of the Midgard Trade Board, named Marin. Randall asked in surprise that he knew them. Marin answered loudly that of course he did. Merchants were people with information, and the two of them were already famous as heroes. Randall awkwardly replied that it was thanks to his friends. Marin said that he was modest. Anyway, let him thank him. He handed him a rock. The guy asked what it was. Marin said it was a membership card for their Chamber of Commerce. Randall asked what chamber. The merchant replied that he was sorry, his name was Marin, and he was a representative of the Midgard Chamber of Commerce. The guy asked in shock that he was from Midgard. Marin asked that it was good. Randall responded loudly that the Midgard Chamber of Commerce was so large that it was said that 60% of the country was under its control. He insisted on formally thanking them later. The man added that until then, he would be happy for them to pay for things with their membership card. Marin asked with a smile that they were in no hurry and could accompany her. Randall replied that yes, it was not too much trouble and Marin would definitely be safe. The man shouted joyfully that it was very kind of them, they were very grateful. The merchant climbed into the carriage, saying that he would prepare seats for them. Marin screamed that it was okay, no need. Randall pointed to the dragon and said that they would be watching them from the sky. Marin said that they would then make sure that they were provided with everything they needed. Randall asked what would happen to all the injured people. The merchant replied that there was no need to worry about them. They prided themselves on distributing high-quality potions. Randall said that it was true. People who couldn't move were running around carefree. A guy came up to them and said that he must be Randall. They helped them a lot this time, thank you. His name is Alan and he is the leader of this united group. Randall shook his hand and said with a smile, yes, it was nice to meet you. Alan pointed to the three guys and said, thank you for looking after a member of the group in the woods. One of the guys said, if they agree to accompany them. He wants them to lead their joint group. Randall asked in shock, what is it? The boy screamed loudly, no, 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 please. He was not a leader. Marin asked why they didn't try. Randall screamed that he couldn't do that. Marin was better suited for this than he was. The girl screamed that he knew she had never had a single subordinate. They started arguing loudly, and everyone looked at them awkwardly. Randall calmed down and said that they would lead their group. He was Randall, and he would be their leader. Marin was standing nearby, offended by the guy. Randall bowed and said that it was nice to meet him. People started shouting that he was Randall, the great S-rank hero who got tired of it and went his own way. Right, he was still involved with the Saint situation. Randall started waving his arms. He thought awkwardly that he wasn't denying it. People continued to shout, what does it mean that Marin is next to him? She was suddenly given a B rank. People said they couldn't believe that she was not only beautiful, but also strong. In fact, she was rumored to be stronger than Randall. Marin began to get irritated by all these words. She shouted with an evil laugh that she would show them now. She calls the savannah. All the people were lifted up by her bats. Everyone shouted in surprise that it couldn't be. People looked at their hands and shouted in shock that the wounds were healing and the left eye that he had lost 5 years ago was healing. The old wound on my leg is also healing. It's just a miracle. Alan said that he would repeat once again that these two are highly respected adventurers who, although they act as two, are as active as an S-class group. He continued to say that he himself is an A rank, but he is nowhere near as strong as them. Up until this point, he had been their leader, but decided to hand them over to the more qualified Randall. Alan asked people what their objections were. People looked at each other and shouted loudly that no, they were not against it. Randall asked the guy if he was sure about it. Alan replied with a smile that yes, of course, the leader of the united group basically only needs strength, so don't think too much about it, it's fine. Randall replied that it was fine. Randall sat down on a log and began to chat with his new acquaintances. Randall was given food and awkwardly asked if they were sure, it looked very expensive. Marin answered with a smile that the two of them had saved his life. It would be right if they got something equally valuable. Alan said that they had really helped them a lot. He told his friends that he was sorry he hadn't made it to them, he really was. One of the guys asked with a smile that they were alive, weren't they? His friend shouted that was the most important thing. The guy turned to Randall and said that he thought they could have easily dealt with his strength there. Randall asked what he was talking about. The boy said he was talking about the Ghost Forest. Randall thought it was a place where the guild forbids low-ranking adventurers to go. The boy asked what happened in the Ghost Forest. Alan said he got lost there. Randall excitedly asked what he was lost for. Alan said that a little demon had saved him. If his parents hadn't accepted him, he wouldn't be sitting here. Randall said that it sounded like a funny story, but still, a rank is pretty prestigious for the group. They are here to help, so they should continue in the same spirit. He looked at Mirin, who was eating happily. The girl coughed and screamed that she was really listening to him. Randall said that it was okay, please, no need to rush. Night fell and everyone went to sleep. Randall was lying in the tent next to the girl. The guy asked what he had done. Mirin asked with interest what he meant. Randall said that he did not think of himself as a leader, especially. He is responsible for forming teams, planning and leading the operation. Earl is on duty as a lookout. The guy went on to say that he began to pay attention to things that he previously thought were unimportant, such as noises and animal movements. This is a really valuable experience. Mirin said with a smile that regarding this experience, she was sure that he had acquired these skills earlier, and now they were simply useful to him. Randall looked at her in surprise. He thought she was right. Looking back, he realized he had been through a lot. Randall said that might be the case. The boy began to reason that Ray, Ace, Errol, and Mirin were constantly getting stronger. He continued to think that he had met many new people. Now was the time to enjoy this life with his friends, but there was still a lot of work ahead. We have to try. Randall shouted loudly that it was good. The city of EXILED. Midgard Company. Randall and Mirin sat opposite the merchant. Mirin said they had been a great help to him. He doesn't know how to thank them. Randall awkwardly replied that they were just passing by. Mirin said that if he was in such a mess, he probably wasn't that lucky. Randall said that he didn't seem to be. The man asked what their plans were for the next few days. Randall replied that they wanted to stock up on supplies. The Mirin cheered, yes, that's right. Mirin said that if they didn't mind, he would like to pay them for what they had done. The man added that he would give them a full set of equipment. Randall asked in shock that he would give them a full set. That was very kind of him. Mirin interrupted him and said that he asked them not to refuse the gift. The two of them are pretty well known. It would only do him good if they used his product. Randall said that this is honesty. Mirin said that trust is very important in business. The guy replied that they couldn't take his gear for free, and besides, they had money to buy these kits. Randall placed a bag of money on the table. Moran said in surprise that even for S-rank adventurers, gold coins in such large quantities were a very large sum. I see, if that was the case, he would talk to the best master he could find. The man asked what he had heard about their arsenal. The guy thought that adventurers needed quality equipment, better known as the Midgard series. It mass-produces armor to uniform standards and guarantees quality products for reasonable money. This move made the Midgard Chamber of Commerce famous. Mirin said that was understandable, as they knew. Their trading company mainly supplies what are called standardized goods, but they also have unique works. Randall asked what kind of unique works. The man replied that yes. Mass production is done with the help of magic. The originals are made by hand, by craftsmen. Mirin added that he would ask their craftsmen to make gear for them personally. Randall happily shouted that it was an incredible honor that the craftsmen who created the Midgard series would work directly for them. Mirin replied with a smile that they should not worry about money, just expect quality gear. Randall asked what they should do now. The guy looked at Mirin, who was quickly eating sweets. He awkwardly asked her what was tasty. The girl happily shouted that it was very tasty. Randall asked her if she had been listening to their conversation at all. The girl angrily replied that of course she had. Mirin said that if she loved sweets so much, she should take some with her. Mirin happily shouted thank you. Randall said that he was too kind. The boy asked if a human craftsman could make good equipment for a dungeon. Marin replied that yes, humans were still far from the level of other races, but he was sure that his acquaintances, the craftsmen, could handle the task. Divine weapons are created by supernatural beings. The divine weapons are also golems, whose combat power is even greater than that of a dragon. The guy continued to say that the sacred artifacts include strong protective magic that covers the country. Randall added that masters who can make such things are worth their weight in gold. Marin replied that they did. Such creatures combined the unlimited lifespan of the High Elves with the innate lifespan of the dwarves. Randall said that he thought the High Elves were extinct. Marin said that it meant they were a minority race, like him. If they had not had combat skills and had not hidden, the merchants would have already found them and worked on them. The hero thought that they had their own special features, but they wouldn't be able to protect themselves. Just like the people of Miram. Marin interrupted him and said that yes, he protects them. Instead of protecting human lives, he creates weapons. He has a special reward for the craftsmen. He continued to say that there are simply selfless craftsmen who only need materials, so he lets them work for a decent wage. The man added that they should not think anything bad. They had not enslaved them. Randall responded excitedly that they did not doubt him. He would give them their budget to cover the expenses. Marin said no. It was indeed more than enough. He would get to the point. First, as far as he knew, the two of them were a tamer and a mage. Randall replied that he was currently listed as a necromancer. The guy summoned a wolf. Randall asked in surprise that it was certainly not a tamer, but rather a summoner. Randall replied that due to the size of the room, he could only summon a Fenrir. There is also a minotaur and a dragon. Marin asked that they show no hatred or hostility towards him. That's another thing about necromancy. Randall said he didn't know, to be honest. The guy said that necromancers control death. No wonder he takes it so well. The man realized what had happened to his interlocutor. They show no hatred or hostility towards him. He wondered if this was another feature of necromancy. The hero replied that, frankly, he did not know. Marin says that if she wants, she can make someone obey her, no matter how badly she hurts or kills them. However, he is not going to use this. The man is sure that it is because he is a good person. The hero replies that this is not true. The girl objects, and says that's exactly how it is. That's why girls who like him stay with him. The man agrees that it definitely makes sense. Randall asked that he could make more gear for the Fenrir, Minotaur, and Dragon. Marin said that she wanted gear too, but that it should be made with a specialization for dark magic. Marin replied that of course he would make sure they had everything. Maybe they would do something else. Marin asked about the demon hunters and vampire hunters. If they were to be targeted, could they please inform them? Marin said, sure. Marin created a bat and said that then let her give him this beauty. If anything goes wrong, she will let them know and they will try to help. Marin told her friend that all traders are informants. It would not be a burden for him. Randall replied that she was right. Marin replied that he understood everything and would definitely inform them. The man stood up and said that he thanked them for sharing their precious story. This was just a small token of their appreciation. He handed the girl a box of sweets. Marin cried out happily that it was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. Marin said that they would find everything they needed for their adventures downstairs. They would be happy to serve them. Marin added that he had an appointment, so he would leave them there. Randall replied that yes, thanks for everything. He asked Marin what they would add to their inventory. The girl shouted, of course. They entered the store. Randall asked if it seemed like everyone was looking at them. Marin smiled and said that maybe they were, but not at them, only at him, and she wasn't needed here. They saw a man yelling at the sellers. He angrily asked since when they started letting such ragamuffins in. The point of this place is that only the chosen ones can get in here. The seller answered that it was true. The man's name is Glim. He is a baron. He pointed to the heroes and asked what those who worked as porters for the candidates for fallen heroes were doing in such a place. Marin said he was a celebrity. Randall awkwardly said it wasn't doing any good. Glim angrily said he was playing the victim, but in the end, he was the one causing all this fuss. He approached Marin and said that with such a man, even the most beautiful beauty would wither away. Let her come to him, he will not do anything bad to her, he will buy her everything. And in return, she will thank him at night. Marin asked in a rage that in their day, even pigs talk. Glim tried to hit her, but the girl dodged the blow. Even children know that you can't shout in public places. Was he fit for such an establishment? He shouted that if she were submissive, he would continue to be nice to her. Weak adventurers like them would be no match for his strength. Mirren asked mockingly that this was so. Mirren approached them and asked the Baron what was going on. Glim asked with a smile that he could not invite unknown adventurers to such an establishment. He added that he had simply warned them. No need to worry about it, Mirren interrupted him and angrily asked that he had not laughed at these people, they were his saviors. The man said loudly that this team was an S rank, and the young master himself was an A rank hero, and they had defeated a dragon together. He had also personally seen them defeat the Goblin King who had attacked his crew, saving his life. Marone added that he thought they had every right to shop at this store. Glim stuttered that even though they were strong, he was an important customer for this store, and after that, important deals. Mirren interrupted him and asked what he wanted to say. The man replied that there was no need to compare him, who had been and would continue to be a good trading partner, with some people who had only saved a life once. Mirren shook his head and replied that there was nothing to be done. Then they would have to stop cooperating and break all agreements. Glim asked what he had just said. Mirren replied that between the S-rank adventurers who saved his life, who were predicted to have a great future, and the current him, there is no need to compare these people. The man turned to the employee who called people to take Glim out. He asked angrily that he thought he could get away with it. He has connections with Lord Cecilium. Mirren said that there was no need to be so dismissive of traders. They did everything for profit, but they had principles. People who contradicted them, like him, were not their customers. Glim left the store screaming. Mirren told Randall that he was sorry for the situation. The guy awkwardly replied that no, it was not his fault, no need to worry. They went outside and went for a walk around the city. The man tried to apologize again for what had happened. Randall said that they had done a good job of shopping. Mirren replied that apparently this had happened before, so he wasn't worried. The merchant offered them sweets. The girl asked with interest what they were. He answered that the most popular treat in the capital was a caramel apple. The girl began to eat happily. She collected a lot of treats. Randall said that she had been too wary of people lately. The girl blushed and replied that it was all because of him. Mirren ran to other shops. Randall thought with a smile that it was indeed good. At this time, Randall's old team came to Morel's house to put their plan into action. A team of former S-ranks came to Morel. Mail immediately noticed that they had not seen each other for a long time. The girl in the hat immediately recognized the person to whom this voice belonged. Morel immediately turned around and walked towards the door where the adventurers were standing. Morel smiled broadly and said that she would just be able to return the debt she owed to Mail. Looking at those standing nearby, Morel immediately assumed that these were the candidates for heroes. The girl chuckled, saying that the guild leader, judging by everything, was just a fool if he thought so. Mail suddenly took out a wand and with the help of levitation handed over Loeg's head. Mail called it the head of Dulanhan, which greatly surprised Quella. Mirel touched her gift. Quella was so shocked that she began to scream, turning to Mirel. The group's priest said that the head belonged to one of the group's members, Loeg Af. From Mirel was enough for Quella to shut up, but she didn't do it herself. The girl grabbed her throat, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to breathe. Fado screamed the name of the saint, while Quella was trying to say something with great difficulty, pointing to her throat. The leader asked Mirel to stop and cease. Quella coughed a little, coming to her senses, and then began screaming that it could not be the Dullahan's head. The girl also said that Mistress Mail should have buried Loeg's body. Mirel continued to hold her head and look at her, then said that it was all a lie. Fado and Quella immediately stared at Mail, demanding at least some kind of explanation. Mail said that she only showed the knights Loeg's head, hiding her image with magic. She had no choice, because she was afraid that the knights might tie the girl up. Mail continued, saying that even so, they still couldn't hide forever. Afterwards, the group's mage turned her head to the other side and said that this person could talk to the knights. She was, of course, addressing the head of the Sorcerers Association, the immortal Mirel. Previously, this girl bore the name, Vampire Hunter. Mirel smiled and said that Mail grasps everything on the fly, as expected. Mail started to say that she would provide something in return, but before she even finished listening, Mirel had already said that she understood everything. The head of the association said that they had already agreed and she would silence the Knightly Order and Loeji. Fado shouted from behind, wanting to know what was going on. Mirel turned to him, calling the boy a small hero candidate, and said that the boy was not only weak, but also stupid. Fado even more angry, but the boy remained silent, realizing that Mirel was indeed much stronger than him. The head of the association turned to Male and asked if he was a Dullahan, pointing to his head. Male replied that she did not know. Mirel examined the head carefully and said that if you look closely, you can't see any signs of special treatment or decay, so everything was much more interesting. Afterwards, Male said that they had only one gift prepared. Mirel said that she was not surprised, and then asked the girl to throw out these stupid adventurers and return. Male looked at the floor, but then looked into Mirel's eyes and said that she had her own methods. Mirel laughed and said that the girl could do as she wanted. Mirel addressed everyone this time, saying that firstly, they would have to make sure that they were not captured. If they needed anything to prepare the second gift, they could tell her. Male turned around and said that there was one nuance regarding the preparation. The girl said that they would not be able to defeat monsters and vampires. This greatly interested Mirel. The girl smiled broadly, putting her hand to her chin. Mirel said that judging by everything, Male was preparing something really interesting and exceptional. Male didn't want to keep the suspense going, so she decided to say it right away. She turned around and said that it was a vampire and a former tamer. Mirel didn't understand how a class could be a former one. Male said that he was completely different, and perhaps even stronger than a vampire. Fado exclaimed, saying that Male was talking complete nonsense, but the mage girl immediately cut him off. Male said firmly that Randall was now a real monster. She knew that they couldn't defeat him and the vampire if they fought like they had before. Fado stared at Male in surprise, saying, "How could this be?" Then he cursed, and Male added that this was why she turned Loeg into this. Male explained that she pumped so much poison into him that he would become a monster far superior to the normal humans that could be found on the continent. Mirel smiled at this. The woman extended her hand and said that if Male allowed her to study one of them, she would stop any attempts to eliminate their group. Afterwards, Mirel said that if their group could bring any of those they had told about alive, then she would instantly make a team of heroes out of the guys. Quella and Fado were in shock and couldn't believe what the head of the Sorcerers Association had just told them. Fado took a step towards her and asked if it was true or not. Mirel chuckled, then leaned toward Fado, saying that the boy, apparently, was not even able to give up his claims to the hero. Fado, however, suddenly froze. The boy turned slightly pale and tried to find an excuse. Mirel said that they didn't have to hide, because the woman's strength was enough to cover the whole group. Male said that Mirel could do it. Fado couldn't get away from the thoughts that were running through his head. The boy was fired up with the belief that with Mirel's power he could become a hero. The leader shouted loudly that they were going to do it. Quella was very doubtful, and started saying that Randall had gone completely crazy because of that vampire. She couldn't even imagine how they would be able to catch the vampire alive. Mirel was both amused and disgusted to look at Male's team. She turned to the magician, saying that her friends, judging by everything, had gone crazy. Meanwhile, Randall and Mirren were already approaching the mansion of Lord Cecilium, who expressed a desire to see them. They flew here directly on a dragon. Suddenly, someone placed a swordblade behind them, which the Lord's guests did not expect at all. A voice asked the couple who they were and why they had come. The knight in full armor held his rapier pointed at the unknown. The knight said that they fell from the sky and continued to find out the purpose of the visit and their identity. Randall raised his hands, showing that they had good intentions. The guy said that he was Randall, an adventurer, and they were here at the invitation of the Lord himself, so he was not some shady guy. The knight immediately apologized for his rudeness and bowed when he learned who was in front of him. He said that he would immediately notify his lord, and a few minutes later, they were already sitting inside the mansion at the reception. Cecilium himself, who ruled the entire region, looked very young. The Lord thanked his guests for finding their time, and then said, "Welcome." Randall looked a little taken aback, then pointed out that this was the first time they had met in person. The Lord just laughed, saying that they could leave the formalities aside, since they were his guests who had saved the region from a lot of trouble. Randall turned to the Lord and said that it was not worth elevating them so. Cecilium immediately asked not to address him so respectfully. The Lord said that for him, they were heroes. He would be glad if the guests behaved with him as with a friend. Afterwards, the Lord said that they communicated with each other differently. Randall smiled and said that he understood. The Lord himself, first of all, apologized for calling them, but it was necessary to get to the point. The first thing he expressed was gratitude for pacifying the dragon. Randall said that they were happy to serve. The Lord began to inquire whether Randall was pleased, for the guild was going to pay him very well for this order. Randall said that yes they were, and that was more than enough. The Lord laughed and said that this was all well and good, but he did not consider it sufficient. The Lord, with a wide smile on his face, asked Randall if he had any dreams, as he would like to fulfill them. Cecilium said that he would do anything, such as a title or a mansion. Then he thought for a moment, and added in passing that his daughter was still too young. Randall, without listening to the end, almost spilled the tea that was already in his mouth. The Lord said that it was not their main topic, but he still wanted to talk about it. Cecilium would like his daughter to be with a man like Randall. Such an arrangement would make him happy, but his daughter is only 7 years old. Randall began to wipe his mouth after tea, and thought he should change the subject. The guy said that he was not a very suitable candidate for a girl of such high status. Afterwards, the guy raised his hands in surprise, switched to something else, and asked about the title and everything else. He wanted to know if the Lord could really give him a title. The Lord said that he could easily award him the title of Viscount. Randall was shocked by this statement, because Viscount is one of the highest titles with which one can occupy a government post. Miriam became very animated, telling Randall that it was very cool. Randall thought that he shouldn't agree so easily. Lord laughed and said that he would leave it up to the guy. Afterwards, the Lord asked about the mansion. He laid out a map and pointed to one of the places. The man said that it was quite far from here, but with Randall's abilities, the guy will get there in no time. The Lord added that this land was previously ruled by his relatives, and there were mansions left there in which absolutely no one lived. Lord Cecilium smiled and said that he did not wish to leave the houses empty, as it would bring resentment. Randall thought it was indeed tempting. Randall thought about it, realizing that with Earl it would indeed be convenient in terms of transportation to the mansion. The guy wouldn't say that a personal mansion was a bad offer. After Randall said that there was something that was confusing him, Lord smiled and said that this was exactly what was to be expected from an S-rank team, as they were quite cautious. The Lord said they could have a frank conversation, getting to the point. Then he added in a drawling voice that this was certainly not a dragon graveyard, but there was a catch. The man lowered his voice a little and said that the undead sometimes came out in that area. Randall and Mirren continued to stare at the Lord in silence. Randall grabbed his head and said that he understood everything. Mirren was surprised that the Lord's lands were full of evil spirits. The Lord, slightly nervously, said that the girl was very perceptive. Cecilium said that he didn't mean undead though, after which he immediately clarified that there were only low-ranking zombies and skeletons. For such a small cleanup and expulsion, the Lord will grant a mansion. The Lord himself thought it was a pretty good offer, and he said so right away. Mirren turned to the necromancer and asked what he would say to such a request. Randall thought for a bit and said in a drawling voice that it wasn't a particularly difficult task for a necromancer. Then the guy said that he was willing to take on such an adventure. The Lord was delighted, and then spreading his arms wide, he said that there were also magical items in the mansion with which they could easily contact him. The Lord asked to inform him of the successes. Mirren suddenly said that this was probably the original goal. The girl looked at Randall and said that judging by everything, the guy really liked this aristocrat. Randall looked at the girl questioningly, and Mirren immediately answered him that in other words, the Lord wanted to recruit them. Titles, a daughter, a mansion, all this just so that they would work for him. Cecilium began to laugh, after which he said that the girl had understood everything correctly. From now on, he would rely on Mr. Randall and Mistress Mirren. Randall was also pleased with this honor. The Lord asked the boy, for he was very curious, if Randall could somehow demonstrate his strength to him. Randall was a little surprised, and then the door to the hall opened immediately. The Lord said that he really wanted to see her, but first there was someone he needed to introduce. A girl entered the hall, saluted the Lord, and immediately introduced herself, calling herself Ayla of the Second Knightly Order of the Cecilium family. The girl said that she had arrived as the Lord had requested. The Lord told his guests, pointing to the girl, that this was Ayla, who was an elite fighter, and who was also very proud of his knightly orders. Afterwards, the Lord pointed in the opposite direction, already addressing Ayla. Cecilium introduced the girl to Mr. Randall and Mrs. Mirren, whom he had told her about earlier. The girl, holding her helmet in her hands, immediately said that they were seeing each other for the first time. She immediately bowed, saying her name again, and then said that she was glad to meet them. Randall noticed that the girl was looking at him very intently, which made him feel a little awkward. The guy scratched his head a little and timidly replied that he was very pleased. Lord Cecilium spread his hands and said that he would very much like Randall to train with his knights for a while. Then the Lord looked up and thought about his reward. The Lord seemed to have some useful information. The man said he could thank the boys with good wine and sweets, which Mirren seemed to like. Mirren's face immediately changed and, clenching her fist, the girl shouted that they were ready. Randall understood that he had no choice here, and, touched by Mirren, answered that it was so. Mirren asked what kind of sweets. The man replied that the girl liked cookies, so he would ask her to cook the best. Randall thought if sweets were involved, then Mirren would not be stopped. The Lord understood that, in order to distract them, it was enough to capture Mirren's attention. The Margrave's true intentions remained unclear. Randall, however, began to let his guard down, smiling and telling himself to remain calm.